Hello everyone. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. In the small mountain town of Ashford Hollow, people didn't lock their doors. Not because they trusted each other, but because nothing ever happened there. That changed on October 14th. At 6:42 a.m., newspaper carrier Liam Kessler noticed something strange at the last house on Briar Hollow Road, the old Whitaker property. The front door stood open. Not wide, just enough to let the cold morning air slip inside. The Whitakers weren't careless people. Martin Whitaker was a retired contractor. Precise, methodical, the kind of man who measured twice and cut once. His wife, Eleanor, kept the yard trimmed and the windows polished year-round. They had lived there for 27 years without incident. Liam hesitated. Then he walked up the gravel drive. The hinges of the front door creaked when he pushed it open. Inside, the house was silent. No overturned furniture. No signs of forced entry. No shattered glass. Just quiet. Too quiet. He stepped into the living room. The television was on, a local morning news channel playing to an empty couch. A mug sat on the coffee table. Still warm. Liam backed out of the house and called 911. Sheriff Dana Rourke arrived at 7:11 a.m. Ashford Hollow didn't have detectives. It had deputies, volunteers, and a sheriff who had seen more mountain lions than murder scenes. She stepped inside the Whitaker home slowly, her boots echoing across hardwood floors. Everything looked normal. Too normal. 2 plates sat in the sink from the night before. A book rested open on Eleanor's armchair, a mystery novel bookmarked halfway through. The bedroom was neat. The bed made. But the closet was empty. Every article of clothing gone. Not thrown. Not scattered. Gone. The dresser drawers were empty too. So were the bathroom cabinets. No toothbrush. No medication. No hairbrush. The house looked staged. Like someone had erased the Whitakers from existence. Except, Martin's truck was still in the driveway, and Eleanor's purse sat on the kitchen counter. Wallet inside. Cash untouched. Phones charging beside the bed. No travel plans. No packed luggage. No note. They hadn't left. They'd been removed. By noon, word spread through Ashford Hollow like wildfire. Theories bloomed instantly. They ran off together. A witness protection. A secret debt. A cult in the mountains. A wildlife attack covered up by the county. But Sheriff Rourke knew something didn't fit. If someone wants to disappear, they take their vehicle. If someone is abducted, there's a struggle. There was neither. The crime scene unit from nearby Boulder arrived that afternoon. They found exactly one thing out of place. In the hallway, just outside the master bedroom, there was a faint line on the hardwood floor, as if something heavy had been dragged. But it stopped abruptly. No blood. No scuff marks beyond it. Just a single straight line. Measured at exactly 6 feet, 3 inches long. Martin Whitaker's height. The forensic team dusted for prints. Nothing unfamiliar. No DNA besides the Whitakers. No signs of entry. No surveillance cameras on Briar Hollow Road. The nearest neighbor lived half a mile away. They reported nothing unusual. No strange cars. No screams. No lights in the yard. Just the usual mountain silence. But Sheriff Rourke couldn't shake a detail. The temperature inside the house was colder than outside. The thermostat read 68 degrees. Yet her breath fogged faintly in the hallway near that line in the floor. The air there felt wrong, like stepping into a freezer for half a second. She crouched down, placed her hand on the wood. It was freezing. A thin crack ran along the line, too precise to be natural. She pressed harder. The board shifted. Just slightly. There was something beneath it. By evening, deputies had carefully pried up the plank. Underneath was not dirt. Not insulation. Not foundation concrete. There was empty space. A hollow cavity beneath the house that did not appear on any architectural record. And at the bottom of that narrow shaft, a ladder. Metal. New. Installed recently. Sheriff Rourke stared into the darkness below. "Call the state," she said quietly. At 9:03 p.m., the first officer descended. The space beneath the Whitaker home wasn't a crawl space. It was a constructed chamber. 10 feet tall. Concrete walls. Soundproofed. Inside were Two chairs, a table, a recording equipment, a camera mounted to the ceiling, a single light bulb hanging over the center of the room, and on the table, two mugs, still half full. The coffee inside was warm. There were no bodies, no restraints, no blood, but on the far wall, etched into the concrete, were words carved by hand, repeated dozens of times. "We are not alone in this house." Sheriff Rourke stepped into the chamber slowly. The room smelled sterile, cleaned, deliberately. The camera was still recording, its red light blinking. She approached it carefully. The memory card was inside. She removed it, hands steady. Back upstairs, they loaded the footage into a laptop. The video began at 10:14 p.m. the night before. Martin and Eleanor sat at the table, calm, not restrained, looking straight at the camera. Eleanor spoke first. "If anyone finds this," she said quietly, "we didn't go missing." Martin nodded. "They've been here for months." The video flickered. A low hum filled the audio. Martin's eyes shifted upward, towards something above the camera. Eleanor reached for his hand. The light bulb began to swing. But there was no breeze. The image distorted. Static crawled across the screen. And then, the camera tilted upward. Not by human touch, but as if pulled. The final frame froze on the ceiling, where a dark shape clung, too large to be human, too thin to be animal. Watching, the video cut to black at 10:17 p.m. Sheriff Rourke closed the laptop slowly. No forced entry, no footprints, no escape route from the underground chamber, no bodies, just an open door, a hidden room, and a recording that ended with something no one in the department could explain. By midnight, Briar Hollow Road was sealed off. Search teams scoured the woods. Nothing. No sign of the Whitakers. No sign of anyone else. The house remained empty. But here's the part that never made the news. 3 nights later, a deputy stationed outside the property reported movement in an upstairs window. Lights flickering. Curtains shifting. When officers entered the home, it was warm. The thermostat set to 72. 2 mugs sat on the coffee table, steam rising, and the television played the morning news. The Whitakers were never found. The underground chamber was filled with concrete. The house was condemned. But sometimes, late at night, drivers passing the bend in Briar Hollow Road swear they see a faint light in the last house. And if they look long enough, they notice the front door, standing slightly open. The order to fill the chamber came from the state. Officially, it was declared an unauthorized structural modification posing collapse risk. The footage from the camera was logged as corrupted. The words on the wall were photographed, catalogued, and sealed into evidence. And then, 2 days later, cement trucks rolled up Briar Hollow Road. Sheriff Dana Rourke stood with her arms crossed as gray slurry poured into the hole beneath the Whitaker home. It flowed over the ladder, covered the table, swallowed the chairs, drowned the light bulb, buried the place where Martin and Eleanor Whitaker had last been seen alive. She told herself it was the right call. Remove the anomaly, stabilize the structure, close the case until new evidence surfaced. But as the concrete filled the cavity, she felt something settle in her stomach, heavy and wrong. Like they weren't sealing something away. Like they were trapping it. The first incident happened 3 nights later. Deputy Colton Reyes was posted outside the property from midnight to 4 a.m. The house was dark, the windows boarded, yellow tape fluttering in the mountain wind. At 1:37 a.m., his patrol radio emitted a burst of static. He tapped it, adjusted the volume. The static sharpened into something else. Breathing. Slow. Controlled. Reyes froze. "Dispatch?" he asked. No reply. Just breathing. Then a voice. Soft. Male. "We are not alone in this house." Reyes' blood ran cold. It was the same sentence carved into the chamber wall. He stepped out of his cruiser and looked at the house. The upstairs light flicked on. Slowly. Deliberately. Reyes knew the power had been cut at the breaker. He knew the house had been cleared. He knew the chamber was solid concrete now. Still, the light stayed on. He approached the porch. The front door stood open. Just slightly. Like it had been the morning Liam found it. Reyes drew his sidearm and stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around him. The television played softly in the living room. 2 mugs steamed on the coffee table. He radioed for backup. The static returned. Then silence. Behind him, the front door shut. Not slammed. Closed. Reyes turned. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. The house felt deeper, as if rooms had been added in the dark. He took 1 step toward the hallway, and the floor creaked beneath him. A crack split across the hardwood, right where the shaft had once been. Concrete dust puffed upward through the seams. Reyes backed away. The crack widened. The sound beneath it wasn't crumbling. It was hollow. By the time backup arrived, Reyes was standing outside on the lawn, pale and shaking. The house was dark again. Cold. Empty. No television on. No mugs. The concrete floor in the hallway was intact. No cracks. No dust. Reyes insisted he had seen it. Insisted the concrete had shifted. But the body cam footage told a different story. The recording showed him stepping into the house, standing in the living room alone, staring at an empty hallway, then turning abruptly and walking back outside. No lights flickering. No cracks forming. No television playing. Just silence. Reyes requested leave the next morning. He never returned to Briar Hollow Road. Sheriff Rourke didn't believe in hauntings. She believed in stress fractures, psychological contagion, the power of suggestion. But she couldn't ignore the anomalies piling up. Wildlife cameras in the forest behind the house malfunctioned nightly between 1:12 and 1:18 a.m. The ground temperature around the foundation measured 6 degrees warmer than the surrounding soil. And twice, the cement poured into the chamber registered vibration from below. From below. There was no below. The foundation sat on bedrock. She ordered ground-penetrating radar. The results made the state geologist frown. "There's empty space under the slab," he said. "That's impossible," Rourke replied. "We filled it." He turned the monitor toward her. A void appeared beneath the foundation. Perfectly rectangular. 10 feet tall. Exactly matching the chamber they had sealed. Rourke's voice lowered. "How?" The geologist shook his head. "Concrete doesn't just disappear." That night, Rourke returned alone. She parked at the edge of the taped perimeter and approached on foot. The air was still. No wind in the trees. No crickets. The mountains felt like they were holding their breath. Inside, the house smelled faintly of fresh coffee. She moved slowly through each room. Everything looked untouched. But when she stepped into the hallway, the temperature dropped. Her breath fogged. And she heard it. A faint hum. Electrical. Beneath her feet. She knelt and pressed her palm against the hardwood. It vibrated. Soft. Rhythmic. Like machinery running underground. Or a heartbeat. The plank where the shaft had once been gave slightly under pressure. She didn't call for backup. Didn't call the state. Instead, she walked to her cruiser. Retrieved a crowbar. Returned to the hallway. And pried up the board. Concrete stared back at her. Smooth. Unbroken. But the hum grew louder. The surface began to tremble. A hairline crack formed. Then another. The concrete split open like a seam. Dust rising in slow motion. And beneath it, darkness. The ladder was there again. Metal rungs descending into black. Untouched by cement. Untouched by time. Rourke swallowed. She turned on her flashlight. And climbed down. The chamber looked exactly as it had before they sealed it. 2 chairs. 1 table. Camera mounted above. Light bulb swaying gently. But the walls were different. The carvings had changed. The repeated phrase was gone. In its place, a new sentence etched across the concrete. "You sealed the door, not the room." Rourke stepped forward. The air felt thick. Heavy. The camera's red light blinked. Recording. She approached it slowly. The lens tilted down toward her. Following. Not by mechanism. By intent. The light bulb above flickered. And from the corner of the room. Movement. A shape unfolded from the wall. Thin. Elongated. As if pressed flat against the concrete and now peeling free. It did not have eyes. But she felt it watching. Her breath caught in her throat. The thing's outline shimmered. Distorted. Like heat rising from asphalt. Then it shifted upward. Clung to the ceiling. Exactly where it had been in the final frame of the Whitaker recording. Rourke's flashlight flickered. The hum intensified. And then, a voice filled the chamber. Not from the walls. Not from the air. From inside her head. You found the room. They did too. The light bulb burst. Darkness swallowed everything. Rourke fired once. The gunshot echoed violently. Concrete dust rained down. Her ears rang. When the emergency lights on her belt finally stabilized, the chamber was empty. No table. No chairs. No camera. No carvings. Just raw earth. No concrete walls at all. She stood in a dirt cavity beneath the house. No ladder behind her. No opening above. Just soil. And the faint sound of breathing. Close. Too close. At 3:14 a.m., Sheriff Dana Rourke's patrol cruiser was found idling outside the Whitaker home. The front door stood open. Her crowbar lay in the hallway. The hardwood floor was intact. No crack. No shaft. No sign of disturbance. The house was cold. Empty. 2 mugs sat on the kitchen counter, steam rising, and carved faintly into the wood of the hallway floor. 6 feet, 3 inches long. A single straight line. By sunrise, Briar Hollow Road was evacuated. The house demolished within the week. The foundation excavated down to bedrock. No chamber found. No void detected. No evidence of structural modification. Official reports concluded. Initial findings likely misinterpreted due to stress and environmental distortion. Ashford Hollow went quiet again. The mountain wind returned. The wildlife cameras stopped malfunctioning. Life resumed. But hikers in the forest behind Briar Hollow sometimes report something strange. A patch of ground where snow never settles, where the earth feels warm, and if they listen carefully, they can hear it. A hum. Slow. Rhythmic. Like a heartbeat beneath the soil. They told the town it was over. The Whitaker house was gone. The foundation dug up. The soil turned, tested, and reburied. Sheriff Dana Rourke was listed as missing in the line of duty, presumed lost in the mountains during a late-night perimeter check. The state police held a brief press conference in nearby Boulder. They used words like unfortunate, inconclusive, ongoing investigation. Ashford Hollow returned to its routines. But the ground behind Briar Hollow Road did not. It began with the snow. Winter came early that year. A sharp October frost hardened the dirt, and by November, the mountains were coated in white. Everywhere except one patch. Behind where the Whitaker home had stood, the earth remained exposed, a dark oval about 12 feet wide. Snow fell around it. Frost crept up to its edges. But the soil in that spot stayed bare, warm. Ranger Caleb Dunn was the first to report it officially. He had grown up in Ashford Hollow and knew the land better than most. He checked for underground hot springs, gas leaks, fault lines. Nothing. Thermal imaging showed consistent heat radiating from beneath the surface. Not geothermal. Not electrical. Rhythmic. Like something cycling. At 2:11 a.m. on December 3rd, Caleb set up a portable seismic monitor near the warm patch. He sat in his truck with a thermos of coffee, watching the readout flicker gently. Wind moved through the trees. Then, a pulse. Soft. Regular. The monitor registered a subtle expansion and contraction of the soil. Not a tremor. A breath. Caleb leaned forward. The graph rose. Fell. Rose again. Slow and steady. He stepped out of the truck. The night was still. Too still. As he approached the bare patch of earth, he noticed something unsettling. The ground was not just warm. It was moving. Almost imperceptibly. The soil lifted a fraction of an inch. Then settled. Lifted again. Breathing. Caleb crouched and pressed his palm to the dirt. It felt alive. Not in temperature. In tension. As if something beneath was stretching against a barrier. He withdrew his hand slowly. And that's when he heard it. A faint hum. The same frequency reported in Sheriff Rourke's final field notes. Caleb stepped back. The hum intensified. The soil bulged. Not violently. Not explosively. But deliberately. The center rose slightly higher than the rest. And from beneath, a shape pressed upward, not breaking through, just outlining itself against the earth. Long. Thin. 6 feet, maybe more. Caleb stumbled backward. The soil flattened instantly. The hum ceased. The night returned. Silent. He didn't report that part. He told the state geologist about the heat, the seismic activity, the irregular readings. He left out the shape. left out the breathing, because he knew how it would sound. The state sent a survey team. They drilled core samples into the ground. 10 feet down. 20. 30. Nothing unusual. Just rock and soil. No void. No cavity. No chamber. The drill holes were filled. The team left. Case closed again. 3 nights later, Caleb returned alone. He brought ground-penetrating radar and a handheld camera. He wanted proof. Something solid. Something measurable. The radar screen flickered as he passed it over the warm patch. For several seconds, it showed nothing but static interference. Then, a clean rectangular outline appeared, 10 feet tall, directly beneath the surface. His breath caught. He adjusted the depth range. The outline vanished. He lowered it. It returned, exactly matching the dimensions of the chamber once found under the Whitaker home. Caleb swallowed. "It's still there," he whispered. The hum began again, louder this time. The ground lifted beneath his boots. He staggered back. The rectangular outline on the radar screen flickered, not fading, but rising. Closer to the surface. The soil split in a thin line. Not enough to break open. Just enough to show darkness below. And in that darkness, movement. Caleb raised the handheld camera. The lens focused on the crack in the earth. The soil shifted. A hand emerged. Pale. Dust-covered. Human. It gripped the edge of the crack weakly. Then another hand. Caleb's heart pounded in his ears. The figure pulled upward slowly, as if climbing through invisible water. A face broke through the soil. Eyes closed. Skin gray. But unmistakable. Sheriff Dana Rourke. Caleb stumbled backward in shock. "Sheriff," he breathed. Her eyes opened. They were wrong. Too dark. No whites visible. Just black. She inhaled sharply. The ground around her chest hardened, preventing further ascent. She strained upward, mouth opening, and when she spoke, her voice was layered, not singular. "We are not alone in this ground." The soil sealed around her instantly, swallowing her back down. The crack vanished. The hum stopped. The earth flattened, perfectly smooth. Caleb dropped the camera, ran. He didn't look back, didn't stop until he reached the main road. When he reviewed the footage later, it showed nothing. No hands, no face. Just Caleb standing in front of undisturbed soil, whispering to empty air. By mid-December, animals began avoiding the forest near Briar Hollow. D-tracks circled the area but never crossed it. Birds refused to nest in trees overhead. Even predators skirted the perimeter. The warm patch expanded by 2 feet. Then 3. The breathing became stronger, more pronounced. Residents on the far edge of town began reporting vibrations at night. Windows rattling, dishes trembling, like distant thunder beneath the earth. Then came the sinkhole. It opened just before dawn on December 22nd. Right in the center of the warm patch. Not violently, but neatly. A perfect square collapse. 10 feet by 10. Revealing darkness below. Caleb arrived before sunrise. He stood at the edge of the sinkhole. The hum was steady now. Continuous. From within the void, faint light flickered. Not artificial. Not electric. But pulsing. Like a heartbeat. And far below, he saw it. The chamber. Not destroyed. Not buried. But expanded. Concrete walls stretching outward beyond sight. Multiple ladders descending into deeper levels. Cameras mounted along every surface. Red lights blinking. Recording. Hundreds of chairs arranged in rows. Facing a central platform. Empty. Waiting. And on the far wall, words carved into the concrete. "Fresh. We are learning." Caleb's radio crackled behind him. State troopers arriving. He looked down once more. The chamber floor shifted. Figures moved between the chairs. Thin. Elongated. Observing. One of them turned upward, toward him, and raised an arm. In invitation. The ground trembled violently. The sinkhole walls collapsed inward. Soil poured into the chamber, sealing it once again. By the time troopers reached him, the earth was flat. Cold. Snow began to fall. And for the first time in weeks, it settled, covering the ground completely, as if nothing had ever been there. The official explanation cited unstable soil conditions caused by excavation. Natural gas pockets. Seismic settling. Caleb Dunn resigned in January. He moved out of Ashford Hollow. But before he left, he mailed an envelope to the State Investigative Office. Inside were printed screenshots from the radar scan. One image circled in red. A label he had added himself. Level 2. Because the rectangular outline beneath the surface wasn't the only one. There were others, stacked below it, descending deeper, like floors in a building. And if the first chamber was just a foundation, then whatever lived beneath Briar Hollow Road wasn't finished building. It was expanding, learning, breathing, waiting. The envelope arrived in Boulder 3 days after Caleb Dunn left Ashford Hollow. No return address. Inside, 6 printed radar scans, a thermal overlay, and a single handwritten note. You buried level 1. You didn't bury the structure. The packet landed on the desk of Special Agent Myra Vance, Geological Anomalies Division, a unit that technically didn't exist. It was an interagency task group formed after too many natural explanations started contradicting measurable data. Sinkholes that formed in geometric patterns, seismic signatures that pulsed like cardiac rhythms, structures that appeared on scans but not in excavation. Vance studied Caleb's images carefully. Level 1, the rectangular chamber beneath the former Whitaker house, was clearly visible in the upper scan. But below it were 3 more outlines, each larger, each deeper, stacked, like floors in an underground complex. There were no mining records beneath Briar Hollow Road. No tunnels. No historical excavation. Bedrock was supposed to begin at 30 feet. Level 2 appeared at 50. Level 3 at 80. Level 4, the scan lost resolution before reaching its bottom. Vance made one call. By sunset, a federal response team was en route to Ashford Hollow. They arrived quietly. Unmarked vehicles. Portable drilling rigs. Seismic arrays. The town barely noticed. Ashford Hollow had grown tired of attention. The lot where the Whitaker house once stood was snow-covered and undisturbed. Thermal readings showed nothing unusual. No warmth. No vibration. It looked ordinary. That unsettled Vance more than anything. Anomalies that disappeared on schedule weren't natural. They were controlled. At 1:12 a.m., the seismic monitors activated. A pulse registered beneath the lot. Then another. Slow. Measured. Exactly 60 beats per minute. Vance stared at the screen. "Record it," she said calmly. The pulses continued for 4 minutes. Then stopped. Silence. The team initiated ground-penetrating radar. The first pass showed nothing. The second pass glitched. Static interference washed across the display. The third pass. Clear image. Level 1. Empty chamber. 10 feet tall. Rectangular. Intact. Vance narrowed her eyes. Zoom depth to 50 feet. The image distorted. Then stabilized. Level 2 appeared. Larger than level 1. Circular. With radial corridors extending outward. Her breath slowed. "Drill at this coordinate," she ordered, pointing to the center. The drill bit cut through soil cleanly. 10 feet. 20. 30. 40. At 48 feet, resistance increased. The operator frowned. "That's not bedrock." "Keep going," Vance replied. At 50 feet, the drill broke through. Sudden drop. The bit spun freely in open space. A hollow void echoed upward through the shaft. The hum began instantly. Low. Vibrational. The same frequency recorded weeks earlier. The ground around the rig trembled lightly. Vance leaned over the opening and lowered a fiber optic camera into the hole. The feed flickered. Then cleared. Concrete walls. Smooth. Curved. Level 2. The camera descended slowly. The chamber was vast. Circular. At least 60 feet in diameter. Dozens of doorways lining the perimeter. Each identical. Each closed. In the center of the room stood a platform. And on it, a chair. Facing upward. Toward the drill hole. Vance's pulse quickened. Rotate camera left. The lens shifted. Movement. In the shadows between doorways. Thin shapes clinging to the walls. Watching the camera descend. Not reacting. Not fleeing. Just observing. The hum deepened. The camera feed crackled. One of the shapes moved closer. Its outline rippled like heat distortion. It did not have features. But its attention was unmistakable. The chair in the center turned slightly. On its own. Facing the wall. The feed cut to static. The drill rig began vibrating violently. "Pull it up," someone shouted. The bit retracted halfway. Then jammed. Metal screamed against unseen pressure. The shaft collapsed inward, snapping the drill line. The rig toppled sideways into the snow. The ground went still. Completely still. No hum. No vibration. Vance approached the collapsed borehole cautiously. She knelt. Pressed her gloved hand against the snow-covered earth. Cold. Solid. No warmth. No pulse. "Rescan," she ordered. The radar screen showed nothing. No level 1. No level 2. No voids at all. Just continuous bedrock. One of the techs swallowed hard. "It's gone." Vance shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "It moved." They set up perimeter sensors overnight. Cameras. Thermal imaging. Seismic monitors. Every device recorded the same event at 3:33 a.m. The ground temperature rose rapidly. The hum returned. And beneath the snow, a circular imprint formed. Not a sinkhole. Not a collapse. An outline. Perfectly symmetrical. 60 feet in diameter. Level 2 pressing upward. The snow melted in a ring. Steam rising gently. The center bulged slightly. Then, stopped. The hum ceased. The temperature dropped. The imprint faded. As if whatever lay below had tested the surface. Measured resistance. And withdrawn. Back in her temporary command trailer, Vance reviewed the footage frame by frame. On one thermal image, just before the imprint disappeared, a vertical shaft briefly appeared beneath the surface, extending down past level 2, past level 3, deeper than the scans could previously measure. The structure wasn't static. It was expanding downward, stacking, like floors being added in real time. She zoomed into the fiber optic footage captured before the feed cut. In the final clear frame, the circular chamber was visible, the doorways lining the walls. They weren't doors. They were openings. And behind each opening, chairs, identical to the one on the central platform, facing inward, toward something unseen. The shapes clinging to the walls weren't random. They were positioned above each doorway, like guardians, or observers. She leaned back slowly. "They're building tiers," she murmured. "Of what?" her assistant asked quietly. Vance stared at the paused frame, of the single chair beneath the drill shaft, facing upward, of witnesses. At dawn, a final anomaly occurred. Every electronic device within a half-mile radius powered on simultaneously. Phones, radios, vehicle dashboards, all displaying the same static-filled screen. Then a single sentence appeared across each display. Level 2 complete. Preparing level 3. The message remained for exactly 10 seconds, then vanished. Devices powered off. Normal function resumed. By afternoon, Federal Command ordered immediate withdrawal. The lot was declared environmentally unstable. Ashford Hollow was instructed to avoid the area indefinitely. No official statement referenced chambers, or levels, or breathing ground. The lot was fenced, then forgotten. But Vance kept one file open. The final radar scan Caleb Dunn had circled in red. The faint outline of something below level 4. Barely visible. Too large to measure. And beneath it, a fluctuation. Not rhythmic. Not mechanical. Irregular. Chaotic. As if something deeper had noticed the drilling. And shifted in response. 3 months later, in a different state, on land that had never been excavated, a homeowner reported warmth beneath his basement floor. A faint hum at night. Snow refusing to settle in one corner of his yard. When ground-penetrating radar was performed, a rectangular outline appeared 10 feet below the surface. 10 feet tall. Perfectly formed. Waiting. The first new chamber was discovered in rural Kansas. The second in northern Maine. The third beneath a condemned strip mall outside Phoenix. By the time Special Agent Myra Vance was granted full interagency authority, there were 11 confirmed sites across the country, all identical in one crucial way. Each began as warmth beneath the soil. Each developed a hum. Each formed a void 10 feet tall. Level 1. And beneath every level 1, there was something deeper. They called it the Foundation Network. Not publicly. Officially, there was no network. No anomaly. Just soil irregularities and sensor malfunctions. But internally, Vance's task force built a map. When the locations were plotted, a pattern emerged. The chambers were not random. They formed a lattice, a grid stretching coast to coast. Each new site positioned with mathematical precision, equal distances apart, like anchor points, or support columns. Supports for what? A deputy asked quietly during one briefing. Vance didn't answer, because she already knew. You don't build foundations without planning something above, or something below. At Site 12, an abandoned textile warehouse in western Pennsylvania, they reached level 2 before it vanished. This time, they drilled fast. The chamber appeared at 48 feet. Circular, 60 feet in diameter, doorways lining the walls, chairs inside each opening, exactly like Briar Hollow. The hum intensified when the camera entered, and for the first time, they recorded audio clearly. Whispers, layered, dozens of voices speaking in low synchronization. The linguistics team slowed the play back, filtered frequencies, separated channels. The message became unmistakable. Observation stabilizes structure. The phrase repeated again and again. Vance stared at the transcript. They need us watching, she murmured. The deputy frowned. Why? Because whatever they are building requires awareness. The feed cut seconds later. Level 2 collapsed. Radar scans showed only solid Earth. Then came the disappearances. Not random civilians. Engineers. Surveyors. Geologists. Individuals present during drilling operations. Across 6 sites, 9 personnel vanished within 48 hours of exposure. No struggle. No sign of exit. Just gone. And in 2 cases, fresh radar scans showed additional doorways inside level 2 chambers. Occupied. One thermal image briefly captured human-shaped heat signatures seated inside the openings. Still, facing inward. Watching. The map on Vance's wall expanded daily. New anomalies reported. Warm soil in Nebraska. Vibration readings in Oregon. Snow refusing to settle in Vermont. Each time, the pattern held. Level 1 formed. Then level 2. Then silence. Until the next site emerged. She ran probability models. Calculated growth rates. Extrapolated data. If the pattern continued, the grid would connect completely within 18 months. Creating a continuous subsurface lattice beneath the continental United States. She presented her findings to a closed congressional oversight committee in Washington. No press. No records. Just diagrams projected on a secure screen. A web of chambers. Stacked vertically. Connected horizontally. One senator leaned forward. You're suggesting something is constructing an underground system beneath the country. Yes, Vance replied evenly. For what purpose? She hesitated, then answered honestly. To hold witnesses. Evidence from Site 14 changed everything. In Nevada, beneath an empty stretch of desert land, the drill reached level 3 before structural collapse. The chamber was massive, over 100 feet in diameter. Tiered seating carved into the concrete walls. Hundreds of chairs, all facing a central platform. And on that platform, a shape. Not thin like the observers clinging to walls in level 2. Not human. Larger. Denser. Its outline blurred the camera lens, distorting pixels. The hum at this depth was overwhelming. The audio feed crackled violently. Then a voice emerged. Singular. Clear. You measure foundations. We measure perception. The team froze. The shape on the platform shifted slightly. The chairs in the tiers were filled. Human silhouettes seated motionless, facing inward, faces obscured. The camera zoomed. One silhouette turned its head upward, toward the lens. Its face resolved into a familiar image. Sheriff Dana Rourke. Eyes black. Expression neutral. Watching. The feed cut permanently. The drill shaft collapsed. Site 14 sealed itself within minutes. Radar scans showed nothing but uninterrupted bedrock. The foundation network accelerated after that. Sites began appearing in urban environments. Basements of apartment buildings. Beneath parking garages. Underneath schools closed for renovations. Each discovery triggered immediate containment. Each containment attempt failed. The pattern was consistent. If observed, The chamber stabilized. If ignored, the ground destabilized until attention was drawn. Vance realized something chilling. The structures didn't merely tolerate observation. They required it. Human awareness acted as reinforcement. Like rebar in concrete, the more witnesses present during drilling, the longer the chamber remained accessible. When teams minimized personnel to reduce disappearances, the chambers collapsed instantly. As if disappointed, by month 6, the grid was nearly complete. When overlaid with major population centers, the alignment became clear. Every major metropolitan area sat above at least one level 1 site. Every rural region between them hosted another. The network wasn't random. It was evenly distributed, balanced, as if designed to support something spanning the entire continent. "What happens when it connects?" a deputy asked one night. Vance stared at the map. "When foundations connect," she said quietly, "they are ready to build." The first surface anomaly occurred in Chicago. A parking lot downtown began vibrating at 3:33 a.m. Cars shifted inches across asphalt. No visible sinkhole. No collapse. Just tremor. Then every street light within 4 blocks flickered simultaneously. Security cameras glitched, and on digital billboards across the district, a message appeared. Level 2 complete. Grid integrity at 92%. 10 seconds later, normal operations resumed. News outlets blamed a power surge. The footage was scrubbed quickly, but Vance saw it in real time. 92%. That meant the system was almost closed. Almost continuous. Almost whole. She requested authorization for a coordinated, simultaneous drill at all known sites. The theory was simple. If they disrupted the grid before completion, perhaps it would destabilize permanently. Authorization was denied. Too risky. Too speculative. Instead, the order was containment and silence. But the ground did not wait. Over the next week, 3 new level 1 chambers appeared overnight in unmonitored regions. The map reached 99% connectivity. Then, nothing. No new sites. No pulses. No warmth. Total quiet. For 48 hours, seismic monitors registered 0 activity. Vance felt the silence like pressure in her ears. Then, at exactly midnight Eastern Standard Time, every known site pulsed simultaneously. A synchronized tremor rippled across the continent. Measured. Controlled. And beneath each location, radar scans lit up. Not with level 1. Not with level 2. But with something larger. A continuous horizontal structure connecting all sites. Like a massive underground ring. Uniting them. The hum intensified nationwide. Phones vibrated. Glass rattled in windows. And on every digital screen that flickered on briefly, one final message appeared. Foundation complete. Structure imminent. The tremor stopped. The ground went still. Snow settled normally. Soil cooled. Radar returned to baseline. All voids vanished. No chambers visible anywhere. No detectable anomalies. The Foundation network had disappeared. Or finished. Weeks passed. Then months. No new sites emerged. No hum returned. The Oversight Committee disbanded quietly. Vance's division was reassigned. Official records classified permanently. But she kept one monitor active in her office. A deep earth seismic feed running continuously. 3 months after the final pulse, it registered a new signal. Not below the ground. Above it, a faint vibration in the atmosphere. High frequency. Widespread. Like tension forming across something vast and unseen. As if pressure were building overhead. Foundations don't build downward forever. At some point, they support something rising. For 3 months after the final continental pulse, nothing happened. No warmth beneath soil. No humming foundations. No disappearances. The country exhaled. Special Agent Myra Vance did not. She kept one seismic monitor running in her office apartment in Washington, D.C. It tracked microvibrations in the atmosphere, something originally installed to measure upper atmospheric shockwaves from missile testing. At 2:14 a.m. on a Thursday in March, the monitor began recording a pattern. Not from below. From above. The signal was faint at first, a high-frequency tremor across multiple cities. Chicago, Denver, Phoenix, Boston. Every metropolitan region that had previously hosted a level 1 chamber. The same grid, but inverted. Vance overlaid the data map onto the old Foundation network model. The alignment was perfect. Whatever had been constructed beneath the continent now had a mirror above it. At 3:33 a.m., the tremor intensified. Weather satellites operated by NOAA began transmitting corrupted frames. Cloud formations across North America showed subtle geometric distortions, faint straight edges cutting through otherwise natural storm systems. Meteorologists attributed it to wind shear. But wind does not create 90-degree angles. By sunrise, commercial pilots began filing unusual reports. A Delta flight descending into Denver described a faint lattice shadow above the cloud layer. A cargo pilot over Kansas reported grid-like refraction in upper atmosphere, like glass under tension. Air traffic control dismissed it as optical illusion. Vance did not. She requested satellite zoom at maximum resolution over the continental center. The first clear image arrived at 9:42 a.m. It looked like nothing. Blue sky. Scattered cirrus. But when contrast was enhanced and spectral filtering applied, lines appeared. Thin. Nearly invisible. Stretching horizon to horizon. Intersecting at precise intervals. A massive geometric framework suspended in the stratosphere. The structure above. By noon, social media filled with posts. People claiming the sky felt wrong. Bird migration patterns disrupted. Flocks turning back mid-flight. Dogs whining at empty air. Then the shadows began. At exactly 1:12 p.m., in cities aligned with the old Foundation grid, shadows on the ground sharpened unnaturally. Edges too crisp. Too straight. Buildings cast angular silhouettes that did not match the sun's position. People looked up. The sky remained blue. But faintly, like looking through polarized glass. You could see it. A web overhead. Immense. Transparent. Connected at thousands of nodes. Each node positioned directly above a former Level 1 site. Vance stared at the satellite overlay. They weren't building underground, she whispered. They were anchoring. At 3:33 p.m., every digital billboard across the country flickered. Power grids did not surge. Servers did not fail. But screens shifted. For exactly 10 seconds, a message displayed worldwide. Structure stable. Observation required. The same phrasing as before. Not a threat. A statement. As if reminding humanity of its role. The first physical interaction occurred in Chicago. At the exact coordinates of the former parking lot anomaly, a vertical beam of distortion shimmered briefly in the air. Not light. Not energy. A column of refracted space descending from the invisible lattice overhead to the ground. Pedestrians reported a sensation like walking through static electricity. One woman described hearing layered whispers inside her skull. Surveillance footage showed people pausing mid-step, looking upward, eyes unfocused, then continuing on as if nothing happened. The beam vanished after 17 seconds. Vance cross-referenced every beam sighting, each one aligned with a Foundation network node. Each one lasted precisely between 15 and 20 seconds. And each one occurred when a critical mass of people were physically present at the location. Crowds. Rush hour. Concerts. Sporting events. The pattern was unmistakable. The structure above activated strongest where observation density was highest. It needed awareness. Human consciousness acted as reinforcement. Just like before, NASA astronomers quietly confirmed the lattice was not solid matter. It did not reflect radar. It did not block satellites. It existed in a narrow band of refracted space, a tension field suspended between gravitational vectors. In layman's terms, it was built in the gap between dimensions, and it was anchored to Earth by the very foundations constructed months earlier. Level 1 had not been rooms. They had been footings. Level 2, reinforcement. Level 3, assembly. Now the superstructure hovered overhead. Incomplete. Waiting. At 2:14 a.m. exactly 1 week after the first atmospheric tremor, Vance's monitor spiked again. This time, the vibration did not ripple across the country. It converged. Toward the geographic center of the grid. Rural Kansas. An empty stretch of farmland where the very first post, Briar Hollow Chamber, had been discovered. Satellites zoomed in. Clouds parted unnaturally. The lattice overhead thickened. Lines brightened faintly. And at the center node, the sky darkened. Not from storm. From density. A shape began forming, descending, massive, indistinct. Its outline flickered like a mirage. Air pressure dropped across the region. Windows rattled 50 miles away. Animals panicked. Emergency lines flooded with reports of something in the sky. Vance watched live feed from a news helicopter circling at a distance. The pilot's voice shook. There's something above us. It's not a cloud. The shape resolved gradually. Tiered. Circular. Layer upon layer stacked vertically, mirroring the underground chambers. But inverted. A colossal auditorium suspended miles above Earth. Chairs lining its inner walls. Billions of them. Facing inward. Toward a central void. Empty. Waiting. The hum returned. Not from soil. From sky. A vibration felt in bones rather than ground. Across the country, people instinctively looked upward. Phones buzzed. Screens flickered. The same message displayed globally. Observation stabilizes structure. The auditorium shape brightened slightly. Lines solidifying. Edges sharpening. As more people stared. As awareness increased. It grew clearer. More defined. More real. Vance felt it then, the terrible symmetry of it. The underground chambers had collected witnesses. Those who disappeared had not died. They had been seated. Integrated. Now the structure above required billions more. Not physically. Mentally. Perceptually. The more humanity acknowledged it, the stronger it became. The news helicopter camera zoomed closer. Through atmospheric distortion, something moved along the inner wall of the colossal sky structure. Thin shapes. Clinging. Observing. And on the central platform, a larger silhouette formed, denser than the rest. The same presence recorded in Level 3 months ago. The voice that had spoken. It shifted slightly. The hum intensified. Across the United States, car alarms triggered spontaneously. Glass vibrated. Birds fell mid-flight. The lattice pulsed once. Brilliantly. Then, every digital device worldwide shut off simultaneously. Total blackout. Silence. For 6 full seconds. No electricity. No engines. No sound. Then power returned. The sky was empty. Blue. Cloudless. No lattice. No auditorium. Nothing. Official statements called it a coordinated cyber attack hoax amplified by mass hysteria. Meteorological anomalies. Optical phenomena. Most people accepted the explanation, because the alternative was incomprehensible. But seismic monitors recorded something subtle after the event. A shift in atmospheric density. Permanent. As if weight now rested overhead. Invisible. Supported. Stable. That night, alone in her apartment, Vance reviewed the final satellite frame before blackout. She enhanced contrast one last time. At the very center of the suspended auditorium, just before disappearance, she saw movement. A chair sliding into place. At the very front, facing outward, toward Earth, toward her, empty, reserved. And beneath the image, etched faintly into the distortion field, were words. Not projected, not digital, embedded in the structure itself. Level 1 above complete. Foundations had been laid below. Structure assembled above. But buildings do not stop at one floor. They rise. For 12 days after the blackout, the sky behaved normally. No lattice. No geometric shadows. No global messages. Air traffic resumed without incident. News cycles shifted. The phrase mass atmospheric illusion trended briefly, then faded into obscurity. But seismic monitors, the ones still quietly maintained by Myra Vance's reduced team, recorded something new. The signal was no longer horizontal. It was vertical. The first confirmed descent occurred at 4:02 a.m. outside Topeka, Kansas, near the site of the earliest post, Briar Hollow Chamber. A farmer named Daniel Ivius woke to his windows rattling. Not from wind. From pressure. His dogs refused to leave their crates. The air felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm, except the sky was clear. He stepped onto his porch. Above his field, the stars appeared distorted, as if viewed through warped glass. Then a column of refracted space extended downward from nothingness. Not light, not lightning, a vertical seam in reality. It touched the ground silently, and the hum returned. Deep, resonant, Internal. Daniel fell to his knees. His ears rang violently. The seam widened. From within it, a shape descended. Satellite feeds captured only static. Military radar showed no object. But thermal imaging briefly registered a temperature drop in a perfect circle, 30 feet in diameter. At ground level, Daniel Ivius described it later in fragments before he stopped speaking entirely. He said it was like watching a building lower itself from the sky. Layered, tiered, circular, but incomplete, as if only a section had detached from the greater structure. It hovered inches above the ground, not touching. The air between the object and soil shimmered, and from its interior, rows of seats were visible. Occupied, human silhouettes, still, facing inward, watching something unseen at the center. Daniel screamed. No sound emerged. The hum intensified. And then, the central platform within the descending structure shifted, rotated outward, facing Earth, facing him. A single chair slid forward, empty, waiting. When law enforcement arrived 20 minutes later, Daniel was sitting in the field alone. The grass beneath him flattened in a precise circle, scorched with frost despite the mild temperature. No object in the sky, no sign of impact. But Daniel's eyes, they were wrong. Black, not entirely, but the pupils had dilated unnaturally wide. He spoke only one sentence before lapsing into silence. It wasn't coming down. Pause. It was checking alignment. Within 48 hours, 6 more descents occurred across the country. Colorado, Maine, Nevada, Arizona, Illinois, Pennsylvania, all aligned with former foundation nodes. Each lasted less than 30 seconds. Each left behind a circular ground imprint. Each involved at least one witness who reported internal auditory phenomena. And each time, one additional silhouette appeared seated in the descending segment before it retracted upward. Vance overlaid timestamps. The pattern chilled her. The descents were sequential, clockwise across the continental grid, like calibration points, testing structural stability, or counting. At Site 9, the abandoned textile warehouse in Pennsylvania, surveillance cameras captured something new. The descending segment did not stop above ground. It touched it. For exactly 3 seconds. Concrete cracked beneath its perimeter. The warehouse walls buckled inward. Dust erupted, and within the haze, witnesses described seeing figures step down from the structure. Not falling, not jumping, stepping. Thin shapes, elongated, clinging to vertical surfaces. They did not move like animals, nor like humans. They repositioned, measured distances, placed long, jointed limbs against walls as if testing material strength. Then they retreated back into the hovering segment, which ascended silently into invisible sky. When the dust settled, the warehouse interior had changed. The floor was no longer flat. It sloped gently inward, toward the exact center of the circular imprint, like the beginning of a bowl, or an auditorium. Media outlets could no longer dismiss it. Viral videos spread, clips of sky distortion, circular frost marks, witnesses describing the same layered voice inside their heads. Observation stabilizes structure. Public panic simmered. Governments issued reassurances. Scientists proposed exotic atmospheric plasma events. But Myra Vance understood. The structure above was no longer anchoring. It was beginning integration. At 3:33 a.m. on the 7th day of descents, every monitored node activated simultaneously. This time, the segments descended lower, hovering just inches above ground. Across 7 states, identical scenes unfolded. Circular sky structures pressing downward, chairs visible, occupied silhouettes unmoving, and at the center of each, the denser figure, the same presence first observed in Level 3 underground. Its outline shimmered violently, as if struggling to condense fully into this plane. Vance watched live feed from a secure bunker in Washington. Pressure readings spiked nationwide. Atmospheric density increased measurably. The hum reached infrasonic levels detectable miles away. Then, at the Kansas node, the structure completed descent. It touched Earth fully. No explosion. No collapse. Just contact. And when it did, the ground beneath liquefied. Not molten, but softened, accepting weight, supporting it. The segment anchored. Permanently. Across the country, the remaining segments retracted immediately, leaving only Kansas occupied. Vance stared at the satellite feed. The anchored structure remained visible now. No longer invisible. A faint but undeniable distortion in open air. A circular amphitheater hovering 3 feet above farmland. Its base fused to softened soil. Inside, silhouettes filled every seat. And at the central platform, the larger presence turned slowly outward, facing north, then south, then east, then west, scanning, assessing. The hum stabilized into a steady tone. Low, constant. Daniel Ivius, who had not spoken since the first descent, stood abruptly in his hospital bed. Black pupils fixed forward. He whispered one final sentence. Level 2 above complete. Then his heart stopped. Within hours, a second segment descended. This time in Nevada. It did not hesitate. It anchored. Then Maine. Then Colorado. 7 total anchor points secured within 24 hours. The lattice was no longer theoretical. It was partially present. Suspended structures touching ground at strategic locations across the country. Not attacking. Not destroying. Occupying. And beneath each anchor point, seismic monitors detected subtle downward drilling, as if the structures were extending roots toward where the underground foundations had once existed, connecting sky to earth, completing a circuit. At midnight on the 3rd day of anchor events, every device worldwide flickered once more. A message displayed globally. Integration phase initiated. No blackout followed. No disappearance. The message lingered 10 full seconds before fading. The anchored structures remained. Visible. Silent. Unmoving. Like monumental architecture erected overnight by an unseen civilization. Myra Vance stood on a hillside overlooking the Kansas anchor point at dawn. The air felt heavy but stable. The structure hummed faintly. Inside, thousands of seated silhouettes faced inward toward the central platform. She felt the pull then. A subtle pressure behind her eyes. An invitation. Not physical. Cognitive. A sense that if she stepped closer, if she allowed full awareness, she might see what the silhouettes were watching. She took one step forward. The hum deepened. The central platform rotated slowly toward her, and a single empty chair slid into view. At the very front, facing outward, waiting. Behind her, military personnel shouted warnings. But she didn't move. Because for the first time, she understood. The Foundation network had never been about construction. It had been about perspective. The underground chambers trained observers. The sky structure organized them. And now, the first descent had begun seating the living. The first volunteer walked into the Kansas anchor point at sunrise. No force. No coercion. No visible compulsion. Just a man in his late 20s who stepped across the perimeter tape while soldiers shouted at him to stop. He didn't run. He didn't resist. He simply moved with calm, deliberate steps toward the hovering amphitheater. Witnesses later said his expression wasn't blank. It was focused, like someone approaching something they finally understood. The hum deepened as he crossed beneath the structure's shadow. The air around him rippled faintly. And then, he lifted from the ground. Not violently. Not pulled. He rose gently, as if gravity had loosened its grip. He drifted upward 3 feet into the lowest tier. A seat extended. He settled into it, and the moment he did, the structure brightened. Just slightly. A pulse of stabilization. The hum smoothed into harmony. Inside the amphitheater, thousands of silhouettes remained motionless. But one more chair was now occupied. Across all 7 anchor points, similar events followed. Not mass hysteria. Not chaotic swarms. Isolated individuals. Drawn one at a time. Each claiming afterward that they heard something different. A mathematician in Nevada said she perceived a pattern completing itself. A teenager in Maine described finally seeing the edge of the map. A construction worker in Colorado told reporters before entering, "It's not taking us. It's asking." When seated, their bodies did not disappear. They remained visible, suspended within the structure, eyes open, breathing steady, facing inward toward the central platform, watching something the world below could not see. Governments responded with escalating containment measures, curfews, military cordons, Electronic interference attempts. None worked. Barriers did not prevent approach. Jamming signals did not disrupt the hum. And when authorities physically removed individuals who attempted to cross into anchor zones, the hum intensified sharply. Pressure in the air increased. Glass cracked miles away. After 3 such incidents, intervention policies changed. Observation without interference. It was the same pattern as before. Resistance destabilized. Awareness stabilized. The structure above did not want to be fought. It wanted to be acknowledged. Myra Vance requested clearance to approach the Kansas anchor point alone. Reluctantly, Command approved. She walked across flattened farmland beneath the looming circular architecture. Up close, it was enormous. Layer upon layer rising into distortion. Its base never quite touching ground, yet fused to it. The hum vibrated through her bones. She stepped into the shadow. Instantly, her thoughts sharpened. Clarity beyond normal cognition. The air shimmered. Within the lowest tier, faces were now visible. Not fully black-eyed. Not altered grotesquely. Just calm. Still. Aware. She recognized one. Sheriff Dana Rourke. Seated 2 levels above. Eyes fixed forward. Not lifeless. Present. Watching. Vance felt the pull behind her eyes again. Stronger now. The central platform rotated slowly, facing her, and for the first time, she saw it. At the core of the amphitheater was not a being, not a monster, not a god. It was a sphere of distortion, a lens, suspended in midair. Within it, images flickered, scenes of cities, mountains, oceans, space beyond Earth. Then deeper, structures beneath other continents, foundations forming in deserts overseas, grid lines mapping across oceans. The silhouettes were not watching Earth. They were watching expansion, the building of something far larger than one planet. And then she understood. The structure above was not a destination. It was a broadcast tower. The seated were not prisoners. They were witnesses transmitting perception outward, stabilizing reality across expanding space. Human awareness was being used as structural reinforcement for something cosmic. A whisper formed in her mind. Not layered. Singular. You built upward with matter. We build outward with minds. Her breath trembled. What are you building? She thought back. The response did not come as words. It came as sensation. Vastness. Distance. Time measured in planetary cycles. A civilization that did not expand through conquest, but through observation. They seeded foundations, constructed frameworks, then invited sentient beings to witness. Awareness created solidity. Without perception, their structures collapsed. With it, they endured. Earth was not under attack. It was being integrated. Behind her, another civilian stepped beneath the structure's edge. A young woman. Calm. Eyes steady. She lifted effortlessly into an empty seat. The hum smoothed again. Stabilization increasing. Vance realized something critical. The number of seats was finite, and they were filling. Across 7 anchor points, thousands now Saturday. But higher tiers remained empty, waiting for more. At dusk, every anchored structure pulsed in synchronization. Not violently, not threateningly, but expectantly. Digital screens worldwide flickered one final time. Capacity at 12%. The message lingered. No panic accompanied it this time. Only quiet. Humanity watched the sky structures openly now. Not denying. Not attacking. Trying to understand. And with each new observer who stepped forward, the lattice above brightened faintly. Visible even in daylight. The grid returning. Stronger. More defined. Myra Vance stood beneath the Kansas anchor point long after sunset. The hum no longer felt foreign. It felt mathematical. Ordered. Precise. She knew the truth no one had yet spoken publicly. If enough humans seated themselves, the structure would fully manifest. Not just segments. A complete sky-spanning architecture. And then, whatever it was building beyond Earth would lock into place. If too few seated, the system might destabilize violently. Collapse unpredictably. She looked up at the empty chair on the front tier, the one that always seemed aligned with her position. Waiting. Reserved. Behind her, radios crackled softly. Command asking for status updates. She didn't answer. because she understood now. The choice was not between resistance and surrender. It was between ignorance and participation. The seated were not victims. They were structural components, anchors of perception, bridges between physical matter and whatever vast construction stretched beyond the atmosphere. The hum deepened slightly. The central lens pulsed. And for a fraction of a second, she saw farther than before. Beyond Earth, beyond the moon, a lattice extending outward into the solar system. Foundations forming in orbit around Mars. Frameworks rising near Jupiter's shadow. A network not limited to one world. Earth was just level 1. The whisper returned. Integration accelerates with consent. Below the structure, more civilians gathered quietly at the perimeter. Not chaotic, not frenzied, just watching, considering. The empty chairs above remained patient. There was no rush, only inevitability. By the time the counter reached 20%, the world had stopped pretending this was temporary. The structures above no longer felt like intrusions. They felt permanent. 7 colossal amphitheaters hovered across Earth's surface, each fused to its anchor point by unseen geometry. The hum that once rattled nerves now vibrated like background electricity, constant, inescapable, and steady. Every time a new person seated themselves, the counter climbed. 22%, 23%, 24%. No speeches, no organized campaigns, no religious movements claiming divine purpose. Just individuals stepping forward. At the Kansas anchor point, the perimeter fence had been removed. Not by protesters, by order of the government. Containment had failed. Resistance destabilized. Observation stabilized. They had learned. Myra Vance stood beneath the structure again, tablet in hand, though she no longer needed it. The air itself told her the metrics. The hum had changed pitch. Not louder, more resolved. Like a chord tightening toward harmony. Above her, hundreds of figures now occupied the lowest tiers. They did not move. They did not speak. Their breathing synchronized in slow rhythm. And always, they faced inward, toward the central lens. Global monitoring systems began detecting secondary anomalies. Gravitational fluctuations smoothing along fault lines. Minor tectonic instabilities decreasing. Auroras appearing at unusual latitudes. Faint geometric veils dancing in grid-like symmetry. Power grids reported fewer surges. Satellite drift reduced by fractional but measurable margins. It was subtle, but undeniable. As capacity increased, Earth itself seemed reinforced. In Geneva, representatives gathered under emergency charter. They projected the live counter onto a wall. 29%. A delegate from Japan spoke quietly. What happens at 100? No one answered, because no one knew. Vance did, or at least, she suspected. The whisper had grown clearer. Not louder, never louder, but more articulate. Observation stabilizes expansion. She had asked what would happen at full capacity. The answer came as sensation. Completion. Manifestation. Connection. Not destruction. Not conquest. Something else. Something enormous. At 31%, the first upper-tier seat activated. Until now, only the lower rings had filled. But that evening, a child in Sao Paulo crossed into the anchor's shadow. 10 years old. Calm. Smiling faintly. She rose higher than anyone before her. Past the first tier. Past the second. Into the third ring. The seat formed beneath her. Locked into place. The entire structure pulsed. And for one breathless moment, the sky fractured. Lines of light traced across the atmosphere, connecting all 7 anchor points in a luminous web, visible to the naked eye. A planetary lattice. Gasps echoed worldwide. Then the lines faded. But the counter jumped. 38%. Markets halted. Religions split. Scientists revised models hourly. Yet panic never fully ignited. Because the structures did not threaten. They invited. And the seated did not appear harmed. Medical scans showed stable vitals. Normal brain activity, elevated in some regions associated with spatial reasoning and abstract processing. But no trauma. No decay. No distress. They were not being drained. They were participating. Vance finally stepped closer to the structure's center than she ever had before. The lens rotated toward her. Within it, She saw beyond Earth again. The lattice extending outward, this time clearer. Frameworks assembling around Mars' orbit. Nodes igniting in the asteroid belt. A ring forming near Saturn's shadow. The network was not random. It was architectural, layered, expanding radially. And Earth was becoming a central stabilizer. Why us? She whispered aloud. The answer flowed into her mind. You build vertically. You reach. You imagine beyond horizon. You are compatible. Human cognition, curiosity, projection of thought into unknown futures. Those were structural tools. To whatever intelligence seeded the foundations, awareness was material. Consciousness was scaffolding. 45%. The number crawled upward. Faster now. Word spread not through governments but through personal testimony. Those who approached described clarity. A sense of alignment. Not compulsion. Understanding. A philosopher in Berlin described it as stepping into a larger equation. A farmer in Alberta called it holding up the sky. A software engineer in Seoul said simply, "It feels necessary." Opposition movements formed, of course. Humanity does not move in unison. Some feared assimilation, feared loss of autonomy, feared that once capacity reached 100%, the seated would vanish. Or worse, everyone would be required to join. But no enforcement emerged. The structures did not pull. They waited, always waiting. At 52%, global communication networks glitched simultaneously. Not in failure, in synchronization. Every screen displayed the same symbol. A circle intersected by 7 lines. Then text. Harmonic threshold approaching. The message lasted 5 seconds. Then disappeared. Governments denied involvement. No known system had broadcast it. The counter continued rising. That night, the hum changed again. Lower. Deeper. Resonant enough to be felt through oceans. Marine biologists reported whales altering migration paths to swim beneath anchor points. Bird flocks circled structures in geometric spirals. Animals were not panicking. They were aligning. Vance could no longer sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the empty upper tiers. Thousands of seats still vacant. Waiting. Capacity mattered. But so did distribution. Each tier filled in mathematical proportion. Too many on lower rings without balancing upper levels caused harmonic imbalance. She understood now. It wasn't just about reaching 100%. It was about reaching it correctly. Precision mattered. Architecture demanded symmetry. At 63%, the first permanent atmospheric change occurred. High above Earth, telescopes detected faint structures shimmering between orbital paths. Not satellites. Not debris. Something translucent. Segmented. Extending. Humanity had built stations in orbit. But this was different. It did not launch. It emerged, locking into place as the counter ticked higher. The lattice beyond Earth was no longer theoretical. It was forming. In Kansas, rain began to fall. But it avoided the anchor point. Droplets curved subtly around the structure's perimeter, as though the air itself redirected them. Vance stood in the dry circle beneath the hovering amphitheater. And she realized the truth. Capacity was not a countdown. It was a construction schedule. Each percentage unlocked new layers, new connections, new stability. At 75%, she sensed, Earth would no longer be isolated. At 90%, the lattice would anchor fully to planetary mass. At 100%, integration. The whisper returned once more. Completion requires choice. She looked up at the empty seat aligned with her position. Still waiting. Reserved. Above her, Sheriff Rourke remained motionless, eyes reflecting starlight. Alive. Aware. Part of something vast. The counter climbed again. 68%. Around the world, more people gathered quietly near anchor zones. Some stepping forward. Some turning away. Each choice mattered. Each mind a structural beam. The hum deepened further. Not ominous, not benevolent, architectural, deliberate. The sky above shimmered faintly as new lines sketched themselves between stars. Humanity was no longer asking whether the structures would leave. The question had changed. Would they finish? And if they did, what would Earth become? The counter ticked upward, 69%. And somewhere beyond Mars' orbit, another segment of the impossible lattice locked into place. The counter reached 75% at 3:12 Universal Time Coordinated. No alarms. No explosions. No catastrophic skyfire. Just a shift. Across all 7 anchor points, the hum resolved into a sustained harmonic tone that resonated through bedrock and bone alike. The sound was no longer something heard. It was something inhabited. Myra Vance was already standing beneath the Kansas structure when the shift occurred. Above her, 3 tiers were filled. The 4th had begun to activate. Seats unfurled like mechanical petals, forming in deliberate geometric intervals. Balanced. Precise. The uppermost rings still waited. But no longer silently. They vibrated with potential. At 78%, satellites recorded gravitational smoothing across the planet. Microfractures in tectonic fault lines reduced measurably. Atmospheric turbulence decreased in violent storm systems. Hurricanes lost structural cohesion sooner than predicted. Wildfires met inexplicable pockets of moisture where none had existed. Earth was not being altered dramatically. It was being reinforced, stabilized, integrated. The lattice forming beyond the atmosphere brightened, now faintly visible even during daylight as silver threads stretching between orbital pathways. Astronomers confirmed what Vance already knew. The structure was extending beyond Earth. The planet was becoming a node. At 82%, a phenomenon occurred that silenced opposition worldwide. For exactly 11 seconds, every human on Earth perceived the same image. No broadcast, no device, no signal origin. A shared cognition event. They saw Earth from a distance, not as astronauts see it, but as architecture sees foundation. Lines of luminous geometry interwoven through continents. Anchor points glowing like junctions. The 7 structures above linked by vast arcs across the sky. And beyond them, a growing framework reaching outward into darkness. When the vision ended, there was no confusion about what it meant. Humanity had been shown the blueprint. Myra stepped closer to the edge of the Kansas anchor's shadow. The reserved seat above her pulsed faintly. The whisper returned, clearer than ever before. Symmetry incomplete. The counter read 86%. She understood. The distribution imbalance remained. Too many in lower tiers. Not enough in upper. Cognition required elevation. Perspective required layering. This was not merely about number. It was about structure. At 88%, a physicist in Nairobi approached the 3rd tier. She had studied the harmonic ratios since 20%. Understood the mathematics. She stepped forward calmly, rose past the lower rings, seated herself in the 4th tier. The structure brightened. The hum refined. The counter surged. 90%. Across the globe, the upper rings began activating in synchronized sequence. Seats forming faster now. Higher. Closer to the central lens. The architecture was accelerating. Governments no longer issued statements. They observed. They recorded. They adapted. Military forces withdrew entirely from anchor zones. Not out of defeat, but recognition. This was not invasion. It was collaboration. Voluntary. Architectural. At 93%, the sky changed permanently. The faint lattice beyond Earth solidified into visible bands at twilight, arching luminous corridors stretching between anchor points and outward into orbit. Air traffic rerouted beneath shimmering geometry. No collisions. No interference. Aircraft passed safely below. The structure coexisted. It did not dominate. It integrated. Myra felt it then. The pull. Not forceful. Not coercive. Alignment. The empty seat above her brightened. The whisper softened into certainty. Observer required. The counter, 95%. Only a fraction remained. Around her, civilians stood silently at the perimeter, watching. Some weeping. Some smiling. No chaos. Only gravity of choice. She looked up at Sheriff Rourke. At the tiers above. At the lens rotating slowly toward her. And for the first time, she understood what completion truly meant. Humanity would not vanish. The seated were not sacrifices. They were bridges. When capacity reached 100%, Earth would not be consumed. It would be connected. Consciousness woven into a network spanning planetary systems. Awareness used as structural integrity across impossible distances. The lattice required minds that could imagine beyond horizon. And humanity had always done that. 97%. The hum rose slightly in pitch. Not urgency. Anticipation. Above Earth, telescopes recorded a new phenomenon. A distant star flickered in precise geometric rhythm. A reply. The network was already reaching others. Other nodes. Other worlds. Myra exhaled slowly. She stepped forward, crossed into the shadow. The air cooled. The hum enveloped her. The world sharpened into crystalline clarity. Gravity loosened. She rose. Past the first tier. Past the second. Past the third. Up to the fourth ring. The reserved seat unfolded. She settled into it. The moment she did, the structure harmonized. A chord long unresolved snapped into place. The counter leapt. 99%. Across the world, one final seat remained unoccupied. At the seventh anchor point, a single upper-tier position. Symmetry demanded it. The hum held steady, waiting. In Reykjavik, a child stood at the edge of the final anchor zone, no more than 8 years old. She had watched the shared vision, watched the sky change, listened to her parents argue and cry and fall silent. Then she stepped forward. No one stopped her. She crossed into the shadow, rose gently, higher than anyone before, to the highest tier yet formed, the final seat. She Saturday. The counter changed. 100%. For one breathless second, everything stilled. Wind ceased. Waves paused mid-crest. Electrons seemed to hesitate in orbit. Then, the lattice ignited. Not blinding. Not destructive. Radiant. 7 anchor points flared in unison, beams of coherent light connecting them across the planet. The beams did not scorch. They stabilized. Above Earth, the orbital framework locked into full manifestation. Corridors of luminous geometry extended outward, weaving through planetary orbits like architectural highways. The hum transformed into silence. Not absence. Completion. Every seated individual remained visible. Alive. Breathing. But now, they were no longer facing inward. The central lens dissolved. In its place, open sky. The amphitheaters became platforms. Observation decks. Bridges. The seated turned outward, toward the cosmos. And Earth felt lighter, not physically, existentially, as if the planet had been acknowledged, recognized, integrated into something vast and ongoing. Across the world, people looked up at the shimmering lattice stretching between stars. No commands followed. No rulers descended. No demands issued. Only a single message appeared briefly across every surface capable of reflection. Node integrated. Expansion stable. Welcome. Then it vanished. The structures above remained. Permanent. Silent. Brilliant. Humanity had not been conquered. It had been invited. And it had chosen to sit. Far beyond Mars' orbit, another lattice ignited in response. Somewhere, another world completed its own capacity. The network expanded, not as empire, but as architecture, and from her seat high above Kansas, Myra Vance looked outward at the corridors of light threading through darkness, and understood that Earth was no longer alone in the universe. It was part of the framework holding it together. Story 2. The town of Crow Hollow had a reputation. Not for murders, not for scandals, not even for the strange fog that rolled in off the river at odd hours. No, Crow Hollow earned its notoriety for the house at the end of Hawthorne Lane. Everyone knew it. Nobody went near it. Some said it was abandoned. Others said something more sinister had taken root inside its walls, and the few who had crossed its threshold never came back the same. Detective Evelyn Hart arrived in Crow Hollow on a rainy October evening, her coat soaked through, her car's tires skimming over puddles that reflected the dim glow of streetlights. She'd been summoned by the local sheriff, an aging man with a wiry frame and a nervous twitch in his left eye. "It's happening again," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "We thought we'd buried it years ago, but it's back." Evelyn had heard the rumors, as any experienced detective would. She'd read the town's history, disappearances, strange sightings, whispers of a cult long dissolved. But stories didn't prepare you for the actual smell. Crow Hollow smelled of wet earth, decay, and something else, metallic, like blood, faint but omnipresent. She parked near the edge of Hawthorne Lane, where the asphalt crumbled into overgrown weeds, and the house loomed through the fog like a sentinel. Its windows were dark, opaque, and uneven. The roof sagged, and the shutters rattled against the walls with every gust of wind. The sheriff met her at the curb. "Evelyn, last night, the Peterson boy vanished." He swallowed hard. Right from his bedroom window. No sign of forced entry. His sister says she saw him going into the house. Evelyn's mind raced. Children didn't just vanish. Not in 2026, not with modern surveillance, not in a town where neighbors could see everything from their porches. But the patterns of Crow Hollow were different. Patterns that repeated. They approached the house. The rain had stopped, leaving the fog heavy and suffocating. Evelyn's flashlight cut a narrow path through the mist, illuminating warped siding and creeping vines. She paused at the front door. The wood was splintered in places, scratched with symbols that looked like numbers at first, but as she stared, they shifted into letters. Messages? Warnings? She couldn't tell. The air felt thick, as if gravity itself had increased just inside the threshold. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the house smelled of rot and wet plaster. Water had leaked through the ceiling in several spots, pooling in irregular patterns across the floorboards. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, once floral, now stained with age and neglect. Evelyn's flashlight caught something in the corner, tiny footprints. Bare, wet, and smeared with a dark substance that might have been mud, or worse. They led toward the stairs. "Sheriff," she whispered. He went upstairs. They ascended cautiously. The house groaned under their weight, and the upstairs hallway stretched unnaturally long, shadows twisting in corners where the light couldn't reach. The walls were covered in more markings, spirals, geometric patterns, and what looked like a rough map of the town, centered on the house itself. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Whoever made these markings had done it meticulously, tracing paths and symbols with a clear purpose. A noise came from the master bedroom, a soft thud, then a scraping sound. Evelyn motioned for the sheriff to stay back and edged toward the door. She could hear whispers now. Not audible words, just syllables, rising and falling rhythmically, almost musical. She forced herself to open the door. The room was empty. Nothing but a small wooden chair facing the window. But the floor was covered in a thin layer of dust, disturbed in a perfect circle around the chair. Evelyn stepped closer. The whispers grew louder, but she still couldn't understand them. And then she saw it, etched into the wall behind the chair, a single word. "Observe." Her pulse quickened. She glanced out the window. The Peterson boy was nowhere to be seen. The yard was empty, but the fog had shifted unnaturally, curling inward like smoke pulled by an unseen force. And then she noticed movement, or rather, the absence of it. The fog thickened above the river, forming shapes that mirrored the tree line, then twisted and lengthened into something that seemed alive. The sheriff whispered, "We've never seen it like this before." Evelyn scanned the room. Her flashlight caught another set of symbols, drawn hastily along the floorboards. They formed a crude arrow pointing toward the attic. She hesitated. The attic had always been the heart of Crow Hollow's darkness, the place no one entered and returned sane. But she couldn't ignore the clues. Whoever, or whatever, had taken the boy left a trail, and it led upward. The stairs to the attic were steep and narrow. Evelyn's flashlight flickered as she climbed. The air grew warmer, oppressive, and the whispers now carried a tone of urgency, as if the house itself was urging her forward. She reached the top. The attic hatch groaned as she pushed it open. Inside, the room was bathed in dim light from a single cracked skylight. Dust motes danced in the beam of a flashlight. And there, in the center, sat the Peterson boy. But he was not alone. Surrounding him were dozens of small, intricately carved figurines, human shapes, unnervingly detailed, positioned as if in prayer. The boy's eyes were wide, vacant, and staring at the ceiling. Evelyn stepped forward. "Hey, it's okay, buddy. Come with me." The whispers crescendoed suddenly, and the room seemed to stretch impossibly tall. Shadows flickered, moving independently of any light source. The boy didn't move. She reached for him. The moment her fingers brushed his shoulder, the figurines shifted. Tiny limbs twisting, faces turning. The whispering intensified into a low chant, almost mechanical. Evelyn's flashlight went out. The room plunged into darkness. Then, a voice, singular, commanding, resonating deep in her chest. "Observe. Complete the pattern." The Peterson boy stood, slowly, and walked toward the far wall. Evelyn followed, heart pounding. His small hand reached out and touched a symbol she hadn't noticed before, a spiral etched into the wood of the far wall. The moment he touched it, the entire attic floor vibrated. The walls rippled like liquid. The skylight fractured with impossibly straight lines, refracting the dim light into a grid of glowing threads. The boy looked at her. His eyes, vacant moments ago, now burned with intelligence beyond his age. "Watch," he said. The attic shifted. The symbols along the walls realigned themselves. Dust and debris floated in mid-air. Shadows detached from the corners, forming humanoid shapes that mirrored the boy's every movement. The figurines multiplied exponentially, spinning in synchronized arcs, filling the space. Evelyn stumbled backward, gripping her flashlight. The air hummed, a low, resonant tone that made her teeth vibrate. And then she understood. This wasn't just a house. This was a vessel, a machine. And the boy, somehow, had become its key operator. The whispers coalesced into a single sentence. "Those who watch complete the pattern." Evelyn's breath caught. She glanced at the boy. He smiled faintly. "Do you want to see?" And in that instant, the attic expanded beyond its walls. The house at Crow Hollow dissolved into fog. Outside, the trees twisted unnaturally, the river gleamed with geometric precision, and the fog itself seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the house's core. Evelyn realized the truth. Crow Hollow had been watching her all along. And now it wanted her to watch back. Because in this town, observation was not passive. Observation was participation. And the house had only begun. The morning after Evelyn Hart discovered the Peterson boy in the attic, Crow Hollow seemed different. Not just because the fog clung thicker than usual or because the townsfolk whispered about what had happened inside the Hawthorne Lane house, but because the very air seemed to hum with expectation. Even the wind carried a weight, a sense of being watched. Evelyn felt it the moment she stepped outside her rented room at the Crow Hollow Inn. She had barely slept. Her dreams had been filled with twisting corridors, shadows that moved on their own, and a small, pale boy smiling at her from behind a fogged window. She knew what she had witnessed in the house wasn't ordinary. The figurines, the whispers, the attic expanding beyond its physical walls. It was as if the house itself had a consciousness, and somehow, the Peterson boy had become its agent. Outside, the trees lining Hawthorne Lane swayed unnaturally in the morning mist. The leaves rustled, but there was no wind. Evelyn's hand instinctively went to her notebook, where she had scribbled every detail from the night before. Footprints, figurines, spirals, spiraling letters that weren't quite language, the evidence of an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. She stepped carefully down the lane toward the house. The Peterson boy had been returned to his parents, but the whispers of Crow Hollow's dark history had only intensified. She had to see the house again, to understand what it wanted, what it required. The trees loomed overhead as she walked, their skeletal branches like fingers scratching at the gray sky. Shadows pooled unnaturally between their trunks. Evelyn noticed, for the first time, shapes moving with the wind, but the wind wasn't moving. Her pulse quickened. Something shifted in the trees. A figure? A shadow larger than any human should be. She paused, her flashlight out, though the sun had not yet pierced the morning mist. A movement caught her eye. Between two oaks, a slender silhouette stood perfectly still. Too still. Evelyn froze. Its head tilted slightly, as though observing her. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She wanted to move, to call out, but something rooted her in place. Then it vanished. Not ran. Vanished. The fog swallowed it completely. She advanced cautiously, flashlight cutting a thin beam through the fog. Every step forward felt heavier. It was as if the trees themselves resisted her approach. The sound of dripping water echoed through the underbrush, though no clouds remained overhead. Evelyn's ears picked up a rhythm, subtle at first, then unmistakable, a pattern in the rustling leaves. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate. The watcher was in the trees. By mid-morning, Evelyn had established a perimeter around the property. The Hawthorne Lane house loomed ahead, dark and oppressive. She'd convinced herself to remain outside, for now, to observe patterns. The house had its rhythms, its cycles. And the Peterson boy, she realized, was only the first participant. Others would be drawn in. Some willingly, some not. Her notebook recorded her every observation. Shadows detach from trees. Whispers begin when a human approaches. Footprints appear overnight along the perimeter. Patterns in leaves suggest directional guidance, as if the forest itself is a map. She crouched behind a fallen log, scanning the tree line. And there it was again, the slender silhouette, now just beyond the property line. This time, it moved. Not hurriedly, not stealthily. It stepped from shadow to shadow, silent as mist. Evelyn's instincts screamed danger, yet fascination kept her rooted. She reached for her camera, thinking photographic evidence could help, but when she raised it, the figure was gone. No movement, no disturbance in the underbrush. Only the faint whisper of leaves, like a sigh. Evelyn realized the watcher was not human. Or at least, not fully. Its movements defied natural mechanics. It didn't bend, didn't stumble, didn't breathe audibly. Yet it observed. Patiently, methodically. And the forest itself seemed to react to its presence, tilting its branches, shifting shadows, creating corridors that funneled her toward the house. By afternoon, she had followed the faint trails and patterns into the deeper woods behind Hawthorne Lane. Here, the fog clung in thick clouds, swirling around her feet like living smoke. The trees were older, twisted into grotesque shapes, their backs scarred with symbols similar to those in the attic. Spirals, triangles, intersecting lines, some carved deep, some etched lightly as if by a claw. The watcher appeared again. This time, it was closer. She could make out elongated limbs, pale skin, and a head disproportionately small to its body. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed faintly, like embers under ash. Evelyn froze, unable to look away. She raised her voice. "Who are you? What do you want?" Silence. Then a whisper, low, resonant, carried in the hum of the forest itself. "Observe." The word echoed in her skull, not her ears. Evelyn staggered backward, gripping her flashlight. It wasn't an auditory signal. It was cognitive, invasive. The watcher wanted her attention, her comprehension, her awareness. She forced herself to take a step forward. The watcher moved backward. Not fleeing. Testing. Measuring. Evelyn noticed that wherever it stepped, the fog parted slightly, revealing shapes beneath, patterns in the soil, carved into the dirt. Circles, lines, and spirals intertwined, forming a map. And in the center of the patterns, a tiny carved figurine. Just like the ones in the Peterson boys' attic. Evelyn bent down. The figurine depicted a small human, arms outstretched, face blank, eyes hollow. When she touched it, the air shifted violently, a tremor running through the forest. The watcher remained, observing. She could feel its gaze probing her mind, examining her understanding. The figurine vibrated faintly under her fingers. Then, as if by command, it lifted from the soil, hovered, then moved, in a perfect line, toward the tree line. Evelyn realized she had to follow. Hours passed. The forest seemed endless. Every step revealed more figurines, more patterns etched into the ground. Some appeared fresh, some older, worn by weather, yet still arranged meticulously. The watcher guided her, but it never spoke again. It simply moved ahead, watching her reactions, testing her persistence. As darkness fell, Evelyn stumbled into a clearing. The moonlight revealed dozens of trees stripped of branches in their lower thirds. And there, carved into the center of the clearing, a large spiral formation stretched across the ground, composed of hundreds of tiny figurines. The scale was staggering. It formed a perfect, circular auditorium when viewed from above. And in the center, another figure stood, taller than the rest, more defined, humanoid yet alien. The watcher stopped at the edge of the clearing. Evelyn's flashlight flickered. The air hummed. The whispers returned, not in words, but as a sensation. A rhythm. A pulse. She realized the watcher wasn't just guiding her. It was preparing her. The house, the patterns, the boy, they were all part of a system. A sequence of observation and participation. And now, she had reached the second phase. The central figure raised a hand. Evelyn froze. Then a voice, not audible, resonated in her mind. Observation is integration. Participation is completion. Will you watch? Her heart pounded. The figurines on the ground began to shift, slowly at first, then in perfect synchrony. They arranged themselves into concentric circles, each layer rising slightly above the last. Dust and soil lifted with them, forming tiers. The entire clearing transformed into a miniature version of the attic she had seen in the Peterson boys' house. The watcher stepped forward. Its form shimmered, revealing more detail. Eyes, mouth, and hands, all precise, all deliberate. Evelyn could feel its intelligence, calculating her every reaction. It was testing her, not threatening her, but evaluating. Her mind raced. The patterns, the figurines, the whispers, it all made sense now. The house had been a training ground. The boy had been the first participant. She was the second. Observation wasn't passive. It was an active integration. Awareness reinforced the structure, made it more real, more tangible. Evelyn forced herself to breathe, to focus. She stepped toward the central figure. Her presence seemed to please it. The air quivered, and the figurines adjusted, forming a perfect spiral around her. The watcher remained at the edge, observing silently, like a teacher overseeing a lesson. Then the whisper shifted tone, urgent, insistent. Do not falter. Complete the spiral. Watch fully. Evelyn understood. She had to take her place, to observe fully. Not just the patterns, not just the structures, but the watcher itself. Only then would the sequence advance. She knelt in the center of the spiral, placing her hands over the figurines, allowing the rhythm to guide her. The air thickened, the fog outside the clearing curling toward them, and the whispers became coherent. Not words, but meaning. Insight. Knowledge of mechanisms beyond human comprehension. The watcher in the trees retreated, blending back into the shadows, but its eyes, those glowing embers, never left her. For hours, Evelyn observed. Every movement of the figurines, every shift in the fog, every hum in the air. She felt her mind expand, not in clarity alone, but in connection, to the house, to the boy, to the watcher, to the patterns themselves. She realized she was part of something far larger than Crow Hollow. By dawn, the spiral was complete. The clearing hummed with quiet energy, the fog dissipated slightly, and Evelyn's senses slowly returned to the normal range. The watcher had vanished. No footprints, no traces, except the spiral itself, now etched into the soil, permanent, waiting for the next observer. She rose, her body exhausted, but her mind acutely aware. She had seen the watcher in the trees. She had participated, and she understood the rules now. Observation was not passive. Participation was not optional. As she walked back toward Hawthorne Lane, she noticed something terrifying. Shadows between the trees had multiplied. Shapes, longer and thinner than before, flickering just at the edge of perception. The watcher was not gone. It had only retreated. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the forest, the house waited. Always waiting. Because Crow Hollow demanded witnesses, and the watcher would ensure they came. By the time Evelyn Hart returned to Crow Hollow for a second night of investigation, the fog had settled thick and low, blanketing the town in a gray pall that muted all sounds except her own boots against the wet pavement. The house at the end of Hawthorne Lane seemed more menacing than ever. Its jagged rooflines, once partially hidden by mist, now loomed like jagged teeth, ready to swallow anyone who dared approach. Word had spread quietly, though faster than Evelyn anticipated. The townsfolk whispered about her bravery and her foolishness. They had begun to avoid Hawthorne Lane entirely. Windows shuttered, doors bolted, street lights left on through the night. But that didn't matter. The fog was growing. It moved independently, curling along alleyways, spilling into streets, wrapping the town in obscurity. Evelyn had walked in it before, but tonight felt different. Tonight, it was alive. She adjusted her flashlight, scanning the perimeter. The faintest shapes moved within the fog. At first, she thought they were trees or shadows of branches, but then she saw the movement, subtle, deliberate. Figures, hunched or tall, indistinct but undeniably human in silhouette, slipped silently along Hawthorne Lane. They weren't approaching the house. They weren't retreating. They were circling, observing, waiting. The watcher in the trees had returned. Or perhaps, Evelyn realized with a chill, it had never left. Evelyn approached the lane with caution. Her hand hovered over her notebook, but tonight she didn't write. She needed to observe, to memorize. The boy's attic had taught her that participation mattered. Observation was not passive. It required awareness, precision, and focus. And the fog was the test. She reached the old oak marking the entrance to the house's property. Its gnarled branches stretched outward, brushing against the mist, creating ghostly shapes. Something moved within them, a long, slender shadow slipping from branch to branch, almost too fast to follow. Evelyn froze. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the shape dropped to the ground, crouching low, and began to move forward, gliding silently across the lawn toward the rear of the house. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she followed. Behind the house, the yard was unkempt, overrun with weeds and brambles. In the far corner, she saw what had drawn her here, a faint glow. At first, she thought it was a reflection from her own flashlight, but no, the light pulsed, soft and rhythmic, emanating from a low clearing in the trees. It was circular, unnaturally so, and Evelyn noticed immediately. The ground had been cleared deliberately. The soil patterned with lines and grooves, spiraling inward like a shallow bowl. The figurines were back, hundreds of tiny, crudely carved human figures, arranged meticulously in concentric circles. Their faces were blank, their arms outstretched in silent plea. Evelyn knelt to inspect them. Each one trembled faintly under her fingers. She realized the figures were not inert. Some sort of energy flowed through them, subtle vibrations that resonated with the fog surrounding the clearing. And then she saw it, the Watcher. Standing at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by fog, it tilted its head, observing her. Its form was taller than any human, thin, elongated, its features sharp and alien. Its eyes glowed faintly in the mist. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. Observe, the word came, again inside her mind. Not spoken, not even auditory, a direct cognition. The Watcher did not speak with words. It conveyed intent, rhythm, and expectation. Evelyn took a slow step forward. The figurines quivered, adjusting themselves slightly, as if reacting to her presence. The Watcher did not move. It only waited, and the fog swirled around its form, thickening, hiding the outer edges of the clearing. The fog itself seemed to have a heartbeat, pulsing in tandem with the rhythm of the figurines' vibrations. Hours passed, though Evelyn could not tell. The fog distorted her sense of time. It thickened, curling around her like a living thing, forming corridors and walls. The Watcher remained at the edge of perception, always just beyond her reach, encouraging her, testing her. And then the whisper shifted, urgent and commanding. Complete the pattern. Her gaze shifted to the figurines. The concentric circles were imperfect. Some had toppled, some misaligned. She reached for them, arranging each one with care, aligning them to the grooves in the soil. With every adjustment, the fog pulsed, softening slightly, revealing more of the clearing. But the Watcher wasn't satisfied. It stepped forward now, slowly, gliding above the soil. As it moved, the fog receded just behind its form, revealing more of the forest around her. The clearing stretched unnaturally, expanding beyond the physical limitations she remembered. Trees bent inward, shadows lengthened, and Evelyn realized the clearing was larger than it should be. The Watcher had warped the space itself. Her heart raced. Every instinct told her to flee, but she could not. She had been drawn into this web, and now she had to see it through. Observation was participation, and she was being tested. The concentric circles were complete. But something was missing. Evelyn noticed it too late. One figurine was absent, right at the very center. Her hands trembled as she searched the clearing. There it was, hidden slightly beneath a low-hanging branch. She placed it in the center. The ground beneath it shivered. The fog thinned. The Watcher stepped fully into the clearing. Its form shimmered in the faint moonlight. Evelyn realized with horror that it wasn't entirely solid. Its limbs, torso, and head flickered, as if it existed partially in another dimension. And the whisper came again, louder, more insistent. Watch. Witness fully. Understand. The figurines rose slowly. First one, then two, then all hundreds, hovering slightly above the ground. Their trembling synchronized, forming a wave that moved outward in perfect harmony. The fog pulsed with them. Evelyn's mind reeled. She realized this was no mere house, no simple haunting. This was an interface, a system. The Watcher and the fog and the figurines were all components of a single, incomprehensible mechanism. Her pulse quickened. She knelt again, touching a figurine. Immediately, her vision expanded. She saw beyond the clearing, past the house, through the trees. Layers of space interlaced with the fog, revealing patterns across Crow Hollow, the river, and even further, entire neighborhoods, streets, and homes aligned in geometric precision. The house's influence extended farther than anyone could perceive. Evelyn staggered to her feet. The watcher's glowing eyes bore into her, conveying a single truth: participation required understanding. Awareness alone wasn't enough. She had to engage, to manipulate the figurines, to witness fully the system's intent. Hands shaking, she began moving the figurines again, adjusting their positions. Each change made the fog pulse more intensely, revealing hidden patterns in the soil, shadows coiling and uncoiling around her like serpents. The watcher moved closer, circling her, guiding without touching. She realized she could sense the rhythm of the fog itself. Its pulsing was not random. It mirrored the patterns of the figurines. Align one, and the fog responded. Misalign, and it resisted. The watcher had designed this test to ensure comprehension, discipline, and attention to detail. By midnight, the fog had thinned considerably, and the clearing stood illuminated by moonlight. The figurines hovered in perfect concentric circles, aligned with the grooves in the soil. Evelyn stepped back. Her body ached, her mind buzzed, but she had completed the pattern. The clearing seemed to sigh, a release of tension into the mist. The watcher paused at the edge of the clearing. Then, slowly, it turned and retreated into the trees. Its form dissolved into the fog, leaving only the clearing, the figurines, and Evelyn. But the fog didn't fully recede. It lingered at the periphery, hiding shapes, movements, and possibilities. She knew now, Crow Hollow's influence was not contained. It extended into the woods, into the town, into the minds of anyone who dared approach. And the watcher would always be observing, always testing, always ready to guide the next participant. Evelyn stumbled back toward the house, her flashlight cutting through the thinning mist. She knew what she had seen would not be believed. It wasn't a haunting. It wasn't a spirit. It was something older, more precise, and terrifyingly intelligent. A system that required witnesses, that depended on human observation to exist fully. By the time she reached Hawthorne Lane, the fog had begun to shift again, curling toward the trees as if anticipating the next visitor. Evelyn looked back at the clearing, at the hovering figurines, and shivered. The watcher had disappeared, but it would return. And she knew, deep in her bones, that Crow Hollow was far from finished. Observation was only the beginning. Participation would be next. Evelyn Hart had thought the forest behind Hawthorne Lane was the heart of Crow Hollow's strange influence. She had been wrong. The next morning, she followed the Peterson boys' path again, this time toward the river that cut through the town like a dark vein. Crow Hollow's river was quiet in the daylight, a slow, murky stream lined by dense trees and overgrown reeds. But when Evelyn reached its banks, she immediately felt the same unnatural tension she had experienced near the house and the clearing. The air was thick with fog, low to the ground, curling over the water's surface like smoke. Even the wind seemed to avoid the river, leaving it eerily still. The townsfolk avoided this area completely. Locals whispered about hearing voices on the water at night. Some swore they'd seen figures moving beneath the surface, though no footprints or bodies were ever found. Evelyn had dismissed these rumors before, attributing them to fear and imagination. But after Hawthorne Lane, she knew better. She crouched at the riverbank, examining the water. The surface was glassy, yet ripples formed in patterns, circular and deliberate, as though something beneath was organizing them. Then she heard it, a whisper, faint, almost carried on the wind, though there was none. Observe. The voice was unmistakable, not auditory, but cognitive, pressing directly into her mind. Evelyn stiffened. The watcher, or perhaps another. Something alive, waiting beneath the water. Her flashlight cut across the river, but the fog absorbed the beam instantly. Shapes moved beneath the surface. Not fast, but deliberate. Shadows that slithered in perfect rhythm, aligning themselves beneath the fog in ways that mirrored the patterns she had seen in the forest clearing. The river was another pattern, another part of the house's system. She followed the bank downstream, careful to avoid the reeds, noting the patterns forming on the water. Small whirlpools appeared in perfect symmetry along the current, almost like stepping stones. Evelyn realized the water itself was a guide, forming paths that encouraged, or demanded, observation. And then she saw it, a figure standing on a boulder in the middle of the river. At first, she thought it was a boy, the Peterson child again, but the figure was taller, older, almost skeletal in posture. Its head tilted unnaturally, watching her, observing her as she observed it. Evelyn froze. The fog moved with it, curling around the figure in concentric patterns, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Observe," the command came again. Her heart hammered. She knew she had to obey. She could not simply leave. Observation was participation. And the river, like the clearing, was another test. Evelyn stepped onto the first set of ripples, which were solid enough to support her weight. Each step was synchronized with the pulsing of the fog. The figure remained still, watching. As she progressed, she noticed shapes beneath the water, more figurines, hundreds of them, aligned along the riverbed in spirals, arcs, and circles. They floated slightly above the silt, moving in subtle, mechanical motions, reacting to her approach. The figure finally spoke, not in words, but in cognition. "Complete the rhythm. Watch fully." Evelyn moved carefully, placing her fingers in the water to guide the figurines into alignment. Each adjustment sent ripples through the fog, synchronized with the figure's movements beneath the surface. The river was alive, humming with energy, its current responding to the patterns she created. Hours passed, though time was meaningless in the fog. Evelyn realized she could feel the river's intent. It wasn't simply water, it was a living interface. The Watcher, or whatever entity guided it, had designed the river to train participants, to expand their awareness of the system, to teach them the rules of observation. And then she saw it, a new figure, half submerged, rising slowly from the riverbed. It was taller than the others, humanoid, but its limbs were elongated, fingers tapering into fine points. Its eyes glowed faintly in the mist, reflecting her own wide, terrified gaze. It extended one finger toward her, and the fog pulsed in response, forming waves of light and shadow that rippled across the river's surface. "Do you see now?" the cognitive voice asked. Evelyn understood. She was not merely observing. She was interacting. Her awareness, her attention, her decisions were all feeding the system. Each figurine, each ripple in the water, each movement in the fog was connected. The river was a node, the forest was a node, and the house was the origin. By midnight, Evelyn had aligned all the river figurines into perfect spirals, arcs, and patterns. The fog thickened one final time, pulsing in perfect synchronization with her movements. The tall figure in the river began to move, slowly gliding toward the center of her pattern. The figurines beneath the water lifted slightly, hovering above the current, forming a perfect miniature of the forest clearing she had visited before. She knelt in the center of the river, her hands touching the figurines. The water pulsed against her palms, sending vibrations up her arms. The fog swirled violently, forming tunnels, corridors, and loops. And then, all at once, the river stilled. The fog froze. The figurines hovered in place. Evelyn felt a moment of absolute silence, a pause in reality itself. The tall figure lowered itself into the water, dissolving into ripples that spread across the surface, disappearing entirely. The river pulsed once more, then returned to normal, though the fog remained heavy, curling along the banks as if waiting. Evelyn pulled herself out of the river, drenched and shivering. She realized that the Watcher's influence extended far beyond the house, the forest, and the clearing. Crow Hollow itself was a system, nodes of observation, channels of participation, all orchestrated by something ancient, intelligent, and terrifying. And the river, she knew, would not forget. As she returned to town, Evelyn saw shadows in the fog, moving along streets and alleys. Shapes that mirrored the patterns she had created. Observation had consequences. Participation was required, and Crow Hollow demanded both. That night, in her small room at the inn, Evelyn could hear the river whispering even from afar, faint but persistent. "Observe. Understand. Complete the pattern." She shivered. Crow Hollow had claimed her as a participant, and the river, the fog, the Watcher, all of them were waiting for her next move. By the time Evelyn Hart approached the old bridge on the outskirts of Crow Hollow, the town was swallowed entirely by fog. The river beneath it, which she had studied the previous night, now seemed restless, its surface rippling with a strange, deliberate rhythm. The bridge itself was narrow, arched, and old, with planks that groaned under the weight of anyone who dared cross. Locals avoided it entirely. They said the bridge had a history of disappearances, people vanishing without a trace, whispers claiming they'd fallen into the river of eyes. Evelyn, having learned the rules of Crow Hollow, understood that the stories were not metaphorical. The Watcher had directed her here, though not explicitly. She felt its pull, subtle yet insistent, a cognitive tug that guided her steps toward the bridge. The night air was thick with fog, curling over the bridge like smoke. Every sound was muffled, distorted. Evelyn felt exposed, as if the fog itself could see her. And perhaps it could. The bridge was narrow enough that she could touch the handrails with both hands. As she stepped onto it, a chill ran down her spine. Something moved beneath the water, too fast to be natural. Shadows slipped beneath the surface, converging, swirling, and then stopping. The river stilled in a way that was impossible, forming a mirror-like surface, reflecting the fog above. And then she noticed them, eyes. Hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny eyes, scattered just beneath the water's surface. Some blinked in unison, others darted independently. They followed her every movement, aligning in patterns reminiscent of the figurines and spirals she had arranged in the clearing and the river. Each eye seemed to pulse faintly, glowing with an inner light, as though each was a node in the system she was beginning to comprehend. The cognitive command came again, stronger than ever. Observe. Integrate. Evelyn froze, realizing the river beneath the bridge was another interface, another test of her comprehension and attention. She knelt on the planks and extended a hand over the water. The eyes shifted, hundreds of tiny ripples radiating outward, responding to her presence. She traced a finger along the surface, and the ripples synchronized, forming lines and arcs that mirrored the spirals she had seen in the clearing and in the river. This was not coincidence. This was design. The fog thickened around the bridge, and Evelyn felt movement at the edges of her vision. Shadows emerged from the mist, indistinct humanoid forms, elongated, distorted, yet unmistakably alive. Some hovered above the water, others moved along the bridge itself, silently observing. She realized with dawning horror that these were participants, like herself, drawn into Crow Hollow's system. Their movements mirrored the patterns of the eyes beneath the bridge. Some were frozen in awe, others had begun to manipulate the patterns, their hands tracing the ripples in the water as Evelyn traced hers. The Watcher was near. She could sense its presence, a weight in her mind, pressing expectation and instruction. Evelyn continued her observation, moving her hands carefully over the eyes beneath the bridge. Each ripple she guided sent feedback through the fog, causing the shadows to react. They aligned, forming concentric lines along the planks, corresponding to the arcs beneath the water. She realized that the bridge was a conduit, linking the river, the clearing, and the house itself. All nodes of observation fed back into a single system. The cognitive whisper came again, urgent now. Complete the pattern. Witness fully. Her pulse quickened. She worked methodically, adjusting the alignment of the eyes beneath the water. Each shift brought a faint vibration through the bridge, a resonance that matched the pulse of the fog and the rhythm of the river. The shadows on the bridge mirrored her movements, lifting their hands, tracing arcs and spirals. She was not alone. The system had called participants before her. They were also observers, also integrators of the pattern. Hours passed. Evelyn lost all sense of time. The fog thickened and thinned in pulses, and the reflections of the eyes beneath the bridge seemed to stretch infinitely downward, creating the illusion of an endless abyss. The shadows moved with precision, echoing her adjustments. And then, at the center of the bridge, something shifted. One eye beneath the water separated from the patterns. It floated upward, hovering above the river like a tiny orb of light. Evelyn gasped. It blinked, then expanded, splitting into dozens of smaller eyes, all synchronized, forming a miniature version of the bridge itself, complete with fog, shadows, and ripples. The Watcher had created a recursive system, observation within observation, layer upon layer. She realized with a shiver that Crow Hollow was not just a location. It was a mechanism, a living pattern that extended through the town, the river, the forests, the house, and now herself. Each participant reinforced the system. Each act of observation strengthened it. The cognitive command returned, sharper and more insistent. Integrate fully. Participate completely. Witness the system. Evelyn took a deep breath and extended her hands once more, tracing the arcs, the spirals, the patterns in the eyes beneath the bridge. Each ripple synchronized with the others. The shadows on the bridge aligned. The fog pulsed. And then, as if responding to a hidden switch, the bridge itself seemed to expand. The planks stretched, the handrails lengthened, and the fog revealed the full scale of the river below, lined with hundreds of eyes that mirrored the system above. She understood now. Crow Hollow was a network. The house, the river, the clearing, the fog, the watcher, all nodes connected by observation and participation. And she, like the Peterson boy and the other shadows, was now a node herself. The watcher stepped forward, gliding above the bridge, its elongated limbs reflected in the eyes beneath the water. Evelyn could feel its intelligence probing her mind, assessing her understanding, measuring her ability to integrate fully into the system. You see now, it communicated directly. Observation is not passive. Participation is required. Completion is the goal. Evelyn's hands moved automatically, arranging the patterns, aligning the eyes, synchronizing the shadows. She felt her mind expand, connecting the river, the clearing, the house, and the fog into a single system. She saw the watcher's influence everywhere, in every shadow, every ripple, every whisper of fog. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the pulse stopped. The fog thinned, the shadows retreated, and the river stilled. The eyes beneath the bridge returned to the depths, leaving only their faint reflections. The bridge returned to normal, though the sense of being watched lingered. Evelyn stepped back, shivering. Her mind raced with comprehension and fear. Crow Hollow had drawn her into its system completely. The watcher had observed her, tested her, and accepted her integration. She was no longer merely a witness. She was a participant, and she knew the system was far from finished. From the bridge, Evelyn could see the fog curling toward the town, moving like a living thing, seeking new nodes, new observers. The watcher had returned to the shadows, waiting for the next participant to approach the river, the bridge, or the house. And the eyes beneath the bridge, they would never forget. Crow Hollow demanded witnesses. It demanded participants. And it always got what it wanted. Evelyn had survived the river's test, but she understood now that survival was not the goal. Integration was. Observation without participation was meaningless. And the house, the clearing, the river, and the fog were all just the beginning. Because in Crow Hollow, the system always watched. And one day, it would reach beyond the fog. The morning after her night at the bridge, Evelyn Hart awoke to a peculiar silence. Crow Hollow, normally alive with the rustling of leaves, distant traffic, and murmurs from the town, was muted. The fog had thinned slightly, revealing the gray outlines of buildings, the river winding through the town, and the skeletal trees along Hawthorne Lane. Yet despite the sun rising in the sky, an unease clung to the air. She had learned one thing clearly: the watcher never rested, and neither did Crow Hollow. Observation was not just a task, it was a requirement. Her experiences at the clearing, the river, and the bridge had taught her that every node, every interface, demanded awareness. And now, she felt a pull, subtle but insistent, toward a path she had never noticed before. The path began at the edge of the forest behind Hawthorne Lane, obscured by brambles and overgrowth. She had walked these woods countless times, but never along this narrow corridor of soil and fallen leaves. The ground seemed to shimmer faintly in the morning light, the fog curling in to obscure it, creating an almost imperceptible boundary between what was visible and what was hidden. Evelyn hesitated. She felt the watcher's presence, faint but insistent, like a pulse in her mind urging her forward. Step by step, she advanced. The forest grew thicker, the trees bending in ways that created natural arches above her head. The path seemed to stretch indefinitely, yet simultaneously compressing. Distances she knew were long appeared close, while nearby clearings receded unnaturally into the fog. It was disorienting, and Evelyn had to focus intently on every detail to avoid losing her way. A notebook hung at her side, but she didn't write. Words were inadequate for the patterns she was beginning to perceive. Instead, she relied on memory, on her senses, on the subtle cues left in the environment: a misplaced stone, a twisted root, the alignment of the trees. All of them seemed intentional, guiding her deeper. Hours passed, though time itself felt distorted. The fog thickened as she progressed, curling around her ankles and rising to her knees. Shadows moved within it, too fast and fleeting to be human. Every so often, a whisper pressed directly into her mind. Observe. Integrate. Evelyn understood now that these were not threats, they were commands. Participation was mandatory. Observation alone was not enough. She could feel the path itself responding to her focus, the soil beneath her feet subtly vibrating, the leaves rustling in a pattern that aligned with the fog's pulses. Crow Hollow was alive, and the vanished path was its next node. The trees began to thin, revealing glimpses of the river below. It flowed silently, its surface dark and opaque, hiding the countless eyes Evelyn had seen the night before. Along the banks, small figurines were scattered, half buried in mud and leaves. She recognized the designs immediately, spirals, arcs, and concentric circles identical to those in the clearing, the river, and the bridge. The Watcher's network extended even here, far beyond the house, into places the townsfolk never dared to tread. Evelyn knelt to examine the figurines. Her fingers brushed the wet clay, and the fog pulsed, responding to her touch. Each figurine vibrated faintly, like a heartbeat. The ground beneath her seemed to hum in rhythm with the fog, creating a resonance that Evelyn could feel in her bones. She understood, with growing dread and awe, that Crow Hollow demanded more than observation. It required alignment, integration, full participation. And so she began to arrange the figurines, aligning them with the natural patterns in the soil, tracing arcs that followed the curve of the vanished path and spirals that mirrored the rhythm of the river below. With each adjustment, the fog shifted, thickening and thinning in waves. Shadows moved alongside her, following the rhythm of her actions, echoing her movements like ghostly reflections. The path narrowed sharply, funneling her between two massive oaks whose branches intertwined above, forming a near-impenetrable canopy. Evelyn's flashlight struggled to cut through the thick fog, but she noticed subtle movements at the periphery of the light. Shadows slithered along the roots, wrapping around trees in unnatural patterns. She recognized them as other participants, individuals drawn into Crow Hollow's system, either unwillingly or by some irresistible pull. They moved silently, their eyes fixed on the figurines and the patterns she was arranging. Evelyn realized that these were not simply observers, they were nodes like her. Each participant reinforced the network. Each act of arrangement, each observation, strengthened the system. She could sense their awareness, their thoughts, and how the fog responded to their attention. The vanished path was no mere corridor. It was an interface, a test, and a conduit all at once. A sudden movement startled her. From the dense fog, a tall, elongated figure emerged, the Watcher itself. Its eyes glowed faintly, amber and unblinking, observing her with the same penetrating awareness she had felt at the clearing, the river, and the bridge. The fog pulsed around it, coiling like smoke and weaving intricate patterns through the trees. Complete the alignment, it communicated directly into her mind. Witness fully. Integrate. Evelyn's heart pounded. She moved swiftly, rearranging the figurines with renewed precision. The shadows around her echoed every movement, creating mirrored patterns that expanded the system exponentially. The fog responded, thickening and swirling in complex spirals that seemed impossible to map physically. She felt as though she were inside a living organism, the vanished path itself breathing and reacting to her actions. And then she saw it, a gap in the alignment, subtle but critical. One figurine, near the center of a spiral, had shifted slightly out of place, its orientation imperfect. Evelyn corrected it, placing it exactly as the pattern demanded. The fog pulsed violently, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble in response. The Watcher stepped closer, its elongated fingers tracing arcs in the air, invisible lines that seemed to correspond to the figurine arrangements. Evelyn understood. Her focus, her comprehension, her physical integration were all being measured. She had passed the test, but only barely. Crow Hollow's system was meticulous, unrelenting. As midnight approached, the fog began to dissipate slightly, revealing the forest around her. The vanished path stretched into the distance, lined with figurines and shadows, the river visible through the trees like a dark mirror. Evelyn felt a profound exhaustion, but also a sense of clarity. She had seen the patterns. She had participated fully. She understood the system in ways she could not have imagined before entering Crow Hollow. The Watcher receded into the fog, leaving her alone on the path. But Evelyn knew it had not left. It was always observing, always guiding, always waiting for the next node to awaken, the next participant to arrive. She looked back at the vanished path and realized something terrifying. Crow Hollow's influence extended far beyond the house, beyond the clearing, beyond the river and the bridge. The system was vast, intricate, and infinite, and she was now a part of it. As she made her way back to town, the fog thickened again, curling around her like a living thing. Shadows moved at the edges of her vision, silent observers, each reinforcing the network. And in the distance, she could see the lights of Hawthorne Lane, faint and beckoning, like a reminder that the house, the origin of all this, was still waiting. Crow Hollow demanded witnesses. Crow Hollow demanded participants. And the vanished path had ensured that Evelyn Hart understood her place in the system fully. Observation was no longer enough. Integration had begun. The fog hung heavier than ever that evening. Crow Hollow was a town transformed, not by storm or disaster, but by something older, something deliberate. Evelyn Hart could feel it pressing against her skin, curling around her limbs, seeping into her thoughts. Every step she took toward the outskirts of town was measured, careful, but the fog seemed to guide her, nudging her toward the next node in the system. The railway crossing beyond the old mill, long abandoned, known by locals as the Silent Crossing. The name itself carried an unspoken threat. Generations of townsfolk had whispered of disappearances here, pedestrians, night wanderers, even stray animals vanishing without a trace. No footprints, no struggle, nothing left behind. Evelyn had begun to suspect that these were not accidents but integration attempts, another node feeding the Watcher's network. She approached the crossing as twilight fell, the last hints of sunlight diffusing through the fog like molten silver. The tracks were rusted, the rails warped from decades of neglect. Wooden ties were brittle, some missing entirely. Yet the fog made it appear impossibly pristine, as if reality itself had bent to the will of Crow Hollow. Evelyn paused at the edge of the tracks. The fog shifted with her movement, curling inward like fingers, brushing against her arms, whispering the command she had come to recognize. Observe. Integrate. Beneath the fog, the tracks stretched forward endlessly, disappearing into the mist. Shadows moved along them, figures too distorted to be human, limbs elongated, heads tilting unnaturally. They mirrored her approach, aligning themselves in sync with the fog, as though testing her awareness, gauging her ability to participate. The Watcher was present. She felt it in every vibration of the air, every pulse of the fog. And then she noticed the first anomaly, miniature figurines, not scattered, but suspended above the rails, hovering an inch off the wood, glowing faintly in hues of amber and gray. They were not static. They rotated, moved, and aligned themselves into arcs, spirals, and concentric lines. The Silent Crossing was not just a physical space. It was another interface, another living node in Crow Hollow's vast, interconnected system. Evelyn knelt to study the figurines. Her fingers hovered over them, then carefully manipulated their positions. The fog pulsed with each adjustment, swirling and condensing as the arcs and spirals fell into alignment. She could feel the rhythm of the system now, the figurines, the fog, the shadows, all synchronized, all responding to her touch. Hours passed, though time felt irrelevant. The tracks extended into infinity, the fog thickening and thinning as though breathing. Each movement of her hands created ripples in the fog, patterns that spread along the rails, across the ground, and into the shadows themselves. Then the whispers began, voices inside her mind, faint but insistent. They were other participants, other nodes, individuals drawn into Crow Hollow's system before her. Some had succeeded, others had failed. Their presence was felt, not seen, and Evelyn could sense their thoughts, their failures, their understanding. They were echoes in the fog, teaching her, warning her, guiding her. And in the center of the crossing, the Watcher manifested fully. Its elongated form was even more unnerving here than at the clearing or the bridge. Limbs extended unnaturally, almost liquid in movement. Eyes glimmered faintly beneath the fog, reflecting every motion, every adjustment Evelyn made. The cognitive command was clearer than ever. Complete the alignment. Witness fully. Integrate completely. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She worked methodically, moving the figurines, tracing arcs and spirals in synchronization with the fog in the tracks. Shadows along the rails mirrored her motions, creating mirrored patterns that expanded the node's complexity. Every adjustment she made resonated through the system. And then she noticed it, a small gap in the pattern, almost invisible to the eye. A single figurine, near the center of a concentric spiral, had rotated incorrectly. The fog around it thickened, pulsating violently as if reacting to the imperfection. Evelyn corrected it, aligning it perfectly with the others. The fog surged, then receded, revealing a hidden aspect of the crossing she hadn't noticed before. A second set of tracks, faintly glowing beneath the mist, extending in a parallel path that mirrored the first exactly. Evelyn understood. The silent crossing was recursive, like the eyes beneath the bridge. Patterns within patterns, layers of observation and integration, all feeding back into the Watcher's network. She had to complete both paths, ensuring the figurines were aligned across all levels. Her hands moved with precision, her mind focused. Each figurine, each act, each spiral became part of her consciousness, a feedback loop connecting her directly to the system. The shadows mirrored her movements exactly, and the fog pulsed in synchrony with her heartbeat. Hours merged into a timeless rhythm. Evelyn could no longer discern where she ended and the system began. Her body ached, but her mind expanded, perceiving connections she had never imagined. The rails, the fog, the shadows, the figurines, all were nodes, all were connected, all were dependent on observation and integration. Finally, at the center of the crossing, the Watcher extended a hand. The fog pulsed violently as if holding its breath. Evelyn followed instinctively, completing the final spiral, aligning the figurine at the intersection of the recursive paths. The fog exploded outward, revealing the full expanse of the crossing, the mirrored rails stretching into the mist, the shadows frozen in perfect alignment. The Watcher receded, dissolving into the fog, leaving Evelyn alone. But she knew it had not departed. It was always present, always observing, always guiding. The silent crossing had been conquered, integrated, observed. And Evelyn had survived, but survival was not the goal. Integration had begun. Exhausted, Evelyn stepped off the tracks. The fog shifted behind her, curling along the rails like living fingers. Shadows lingered at the edges of her vision, participants reinforcing the network, echoing her actions, ensuring the node's stability. She knew the Watcher would continue its observation, waiting for the next anomaly, the next participant, the next opportunity to expand Crow Hollow's influence. As she returned to the town proper, Evelyn felt the weight of her new awareness pressing upon her. Crow Hollow was no longer just a place. It was a system, a network of nodes, a living organism sustained by observation and participation. And the silent crossing had confirmed it. She was now part of it, and the system would never forget. Evelyn Hart approached the edge of Crow Hollow's old quarry just as twilight fell, the horizon smudged with deep gray clouds and fog curling from the forested edges like smoke from a hidden fire. The quarry had been abandoned for decades, its steep walls pocked and scarred from years of excavation. Locals called it cursed, though none could explain why. Evelyn had heard stories of strange disappearances, voices echoing from the depths, and figures glimpsed in the shadows far below. But now, after the clearing, the river, the bridge, and the silent crossing, she understood. The quarry was not cursed, it was another node in Crow Hollow's system. Another interface demanding observation, demanding participation. The pull she felt this time was stronger, more insistent, like a tugging at the very core of her awareness. The Watcher had called her here, and she did not resist. The fog thickened around her as she approached the rim of the quarry. Beneath her, the depths yawned wide, a chasm swallowed by darkness and mist. The air was heavy, carrying the faint scent of wet stone and decay. Every instinct screamed for caution, but Evelyn had learned caution alone was insufficient. Observation was the key, but observation now had to be coupled with courage. She knelt at the edge, peering into the abyss. Patterns flickered faintly in the darkness below, concentric circles of tiny lights, arcs, and spirals that mirrored those she had arranged in the clearing and along the silent crossing. Hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny figurines hovered there, suspended above the quarry floor by an invisible force, their forms dimly glowing like lanterns. The Watcher's influence was undeniable here. The depth itself had become a system, and she was expected to descend. The cognitive whisper was immediate and commanding. Descend. Integrate fully. Witness completely. Evelyn swallowed hard. The descent would be dangerous, physically and mentally. The quarry walls were sheer, the fog obscuring every foothold, every ledge. Yet she knew resistance was impossible. The system demanded her participation, and she would be nothing more than an observer if she refused. She began carefully, finding a narrow ledge that jutted from the rock face. The fog shifted around her, curling like living fingers, brushing against her skin, guiding her downward. Shadows moved along the quarry walls, faint and distorted. Some seemed human, others elongated, twisted, unrecognizable. All were observers, or perhaps participants, mirrors of her own actions. As she descended, she noticed that the patterns below grew more complex. The figurines arranged themselves into concentric layers, spirals intersecting arcs in impossible geometries. Some floated horizontally, some vertically, some aligned with the jagged quarry walls. Evelyn realized that her observation alone was insufficient. She would need to physically manipulate the figurines to complete the patterns. Each step deeper into the quarry intensified the fog. It clung to her like a living thing, wrapping her arms, shifting with her every motion. Her mind pulsed in rhythm with the fog, the figurines, and the shadows. The watcher's presence was unmistakable, a weight in her consciousness pressing instructions, guiding her focus. Finally, she reached a narrow plateau about halfway down the quarry wall. From here, she could see the vast expanse below, a chasm alive with energy. The fog swirled in layered currents, the figurines hovering within, casting faint glows that reflected off the rock. Evelyn knelt and extended her hands over the nearest group. The figurines responded. They rotated, shifted, and aligned themselves in patterns dictated by her touch. The fog pulsed with every adjustment, ripples spreading across the quarry floor. Shadows mirrored her actions, creating multiple layers of alignment that reinforced the node's integrity. She realized that this descent was more than physical. It was mental, a test of her comprehension and precision. The cognitive command came again, louder, insistent. Align. Complete. Integrate fully. Her pulse quickened as she traced arcs and spirals, adjusting figurines, sensing the rhythm of the quarry itself. The fog thickened, forming corridors of visibility and obstruction, forcing her to focus on each action with meticulous care. Misalignment could disrupt the node, and she understood that failure here could have consequences far beyond the quarry walls. Hours passed, though Evelyn had no sense of time. The quarry seemed to stretch endlessly below, yet her attention remained fixed on the patterns. The watcher moved among the fog and shadows, observing her actions, testing her integration. At one point, a sudden tremor ran through the rock, causing a small section of ledge to crumble. Figurines toppled slightly, arcs misaligned, and the fog pulsed violently, almost like a heartbeat. Evelyn reacted instinctively, realigning every piece, restoring harmony to the patterns. The watcher's presence intensified, almost approving, and the tremor subsided as if acknowledging her correction. Below her, the central spiral of figurines pulsed with a steady rhythm. The watcher communicated without words, projecting awareness directly into her mind. Understand. Observe fully. Integration is survival. Evelyn felt it in her bones. Survival was not enough. Participation was mandatory. Each figurine she aligned, each ripple she controlled, expanded her consciousness into the system. She was no longer merely an observer. She was part of the node itself. Eventually, she reached the quarry floor. The fog parted slightly, revealing the full complexity of the patterns. Spirals intertwined with arcs, concentric circles overlapping with vertical planes of figurines suspended mid-air. Shadows hovered around the edges, participants from previous integrations, echoing her movements, reinforcing the system. Evelyn knelt at the center, touching a figurine that pulsed brighter than the rest. Immediately, her perception expanded. She could see connections between the quarry, the clearing, the river, the bridge, and the silent crossing. Each node mirrored the others, forming a recursive network of observation and participation. Crow Hollow was not simply a town. It was an organism, a living system sustained by the awareness and integration of its participants. The watcher glided closer, its elongated form reflected in the glowing figurines. Evelyn felt its intelligence probe her mind, assessing her understanding, measuring her ability to integrate fully into the system. Completion is not the end, it communicated directly. Observation evolves into integration. Integration evolves into expansion. Evelyn understood. The descent had been a test, but it was not over. The system was vast, and she had only begun to perceive its full scope. Each node, each pattern, each participant contributed to the whole, and the Watcher ensured that no element remained unobserved or unintegrated. By midnight, Evelyn had completed the alignment of the figurines on the quarry floor, integrating every spiral, arc, and concentric circle with precision. The fog pulsed once more, then thinned, revealing the depth and breadth of the quarry, the patterns glowing faintly, perfectly aligned. The shadows receded into the edges of her perception. The Watcher dissolved into the fog, leaving her alone. She climbed slowly back toward the rim, exhaustion weighing her down, yet her mind thrummed with clarity. Crow Hollow's system was infinite, recursive, and alive. Observation was only the beginning. Participation was mandatory. And she had taken her first full descent into the heart of its network. As she reached the top, the fog lifted slightly, revealing the town below. Lights flickered in windows, the river pulsed faintly, and she could see the bridge in the clearing, distant but connected. Evelyn knew now that she was no longer merely a witness. She was a node, integrated into the system, aware of the Watcher, and fully part of Crow Hollow's design. But she also knew that the descent had only revealed a fraction of the system's complexity. Other nodes awaited, nodes deeper, darker, more intricate than anything she had encountered. And the Watcher would always be there, observing, guiding, demanding further integration. Evelyn's breath came in shallow gasps. The quarry, the first true descent, had changed everything. She understood now that Crow Hollow was not just a town, not just a house, not just a river or bridge. It was a network, a living organism sustained by observation, awareness, and integration. And she was a part of it. The fog had become thicker than Evelyn Hart had ever seen, curling around the town in rolling sheets that swallowed sound and light alike. Even Hawthorne Lane, with its familiar houses and street lights, appeared alien, distorted, as if she were walking through a dream that refused to obey the laws of reality. Yet Evelyn knew exactly where she needed to go. The Watcher had called her, as it always did, to the next node, an old, abandoned chapel perched on a hill at the far edge of Crow Hollow. Locals called it the Chapel of the Seated, after the large stone statue that occupied its altar, said to watch all who entered. Evelyn now suspected it was far more than mere folklore. The town below was muted, the river a dark mirror threading through the fog. Evelyn's footsteps were muffled against the soft, wet earth, but she felt no solitude. The shadows had begun to gather, silent witnesses to her approach. Their elongated limbs and unnatural posture mirrored the Watcher itself, reminding her that Crow Hollow was alive everywhere, in every detail, in every shadow. The chapel rose ahead of her like a monument, its windows dark and empty, stone walls slick with mist. At the top of the steps, the large stone statue came into view. It depicted a seated figure, almost human, but with subtle distortions, elongated fingers resting on its knees, a head tilted slightly forward as if observing everything simultaneously. Its eyes were carved too large, too deliberate, and Evelyn felt their gaze pierce her very thoughts. She paused at the threshold, the cognitive command pressing insistently. Observe. Integrate. Participate fully. Evelyn stepped inside. The air was cold and still, yet it thrummed faintly, as though the building itself were alive. The fog from outside seeped through the broken windows, curling around the pews and altar in delicate, deliberate spirals. On the floor lay hundreds of figurines, scattered and misaligned. Evelyn recognized their patterns immediately, spirals, arcs, concentric circles, all reflecting nodes she had encountered at the clearing, the river, the bridge, and the quarry. The Watcher was here, she realized. It did not need to appear. Its presence was embedded in every shadow, every ripple of fog, every vibration in the chapel's stone floor. She knelt before the figurines, beginning to rearrange them. Each adjustment sent pulses through the fog, which responded like a living entity. Shadows moved at the edges of her vision, echoing her actions. They were participants, nodes already integrated into Crow Hollow's system, their awareness reinforcing the patterns she created. Hours passed unnoticed. Time had little meaning in the presence of the Watcher. The chapel expanded beyond its physical walls, the fog forming corridors, arches, and spirals that stretched into infinity. Evelyn realized that the seated figure itself was more than stone, it was a node. Its gaze, its posture, Its very presence coordinated the patterns of figurines, shadows, and fog within the chapel. The cognitive command intensified. Align fully. Observe completely. Integrate entirely. Evelyn's hands moved automatically, following the logic of the patterns. Spirals intersected with arcs, arcs with concentric circles, each figurine a crucial component of the node. Shadows synchronized their movements with hers, reinforcing the system's integrity. The seated figure's eyes seemed to glow faintly, amber light reflecting off every polished figurine, amplifying the fog's pulse. Midway through her alignment, Evelyn sensed a deeper layer in the chapel. The floor beneath the altar vibrated, and she realized it was hollow, concealing another space. A narrow stairwell spiraled downward into darkness, faintly outlined by the mist that now rose from below like smoke. The Watcher's presence was strongest here, almost physical, pressing at the edges of her consciousness. With a deep breath, Evelyn descended. The stairwell was narrow, twisting, and damp. Shadows clung to the walls, observing, mirroring, and guiding. At the bottom, she found a subterranean chamber, circular and impossibly large. Hundreds more figurines hovered mid-air, forming recursive patterns that mirrored the chapel above. The seated figure's influence extended even here. Its gaze, though physically distant, seemed to command the alignment of the figurines, the movement of the shadows, and the flow of fog. Evelyn understood now that every node, every level of Crow Hollow's system, was recursive, a fractal of observation and participation. Hours became days, though Evelyn could not be certain of time. She adjusted figurines, aligned spirals, traced arcs, synchronized shadows, and felt herself becoming one with the node. The Watcher's presence pressed directly into her mind, teaching her, guiding her, assessing her integration. Then she noticed something new. Among the hovering figurines was one that mirrored her exactly, a miniature version of herself, kneeling in the chamber, hands moving in perfect synchronization. It pulsed faintly, a heartbeat within the system. Evelyn touched it, and for the first time, she felt a feedback loop so intense it made her gasp. Her awareness was now fully intertwined with the node, the shadows, the fog, the chapel, and the seated figure. She understood then that she was both observer and participant, node and network, human and system. Crow Hollow did not merely watch, it absorbed, integrated, and amplified. The cognitive command came one final time, louder, more insistent. Completion is integration. Integration is expansion. Witness fully. Evelyn extended her hands, completing the final spiral, aligning the miniature of herself with the surrounding figurines. The fog pulsed violently, the shadows lifted, and the chamber seemed to expand infinitely, revealing the full scope of the seated figure's influence. The figurines above and below mirrored each other perfectly, arcs intersecting spirals, spirals intersecting circles, recursive layers aligning into flawless symmetry. Evelyn felt a deep resonance within her mind, the Watcher's approval pressing gently but undeniably. She had integrated fully. Exhausted and trembling, Evelyn emerged from the chamber, the stairwell, and finally the chapel. The fog had thinned slightly outside, revealing the town's distorted outline below. The seated figure loomed in the doorway, silent, eternal, yet somehow aware of her success. She had survived the chapel, the seated, but she understood now that survival was only the beginning. Crow Hollow's system was infinite, recursive, and alive. Every node, every participant, every shadow reinforced the network. Observation demanded integration, and integration demanded constant participation. Evelyn Hart had become a node herself, and Crow Hollow would never forget. The fog did not lift after the chapel. It settled. It pressed low over Crow Hollow like a lid, containing something that had grown too large to be unseen. From the hilltop, Evelyn Hart watched it drift through the streets, curl around porches, slip through cracked windows. The town looked intact, lights flickering in kitchens, cars parked in driveways, curtains shifting faintly behind glass. But she knew better now. Crow Hollow was no longer simply active. It was consolidating. The seated had marked a shift. The subterranean chamber, the recursive figurines, the miniature of herself, those had not been isolated tests. They were inheritance rights. And as Evelyn descended the chapel steps and walked back toward Hawthorne Lane, she felt something new within her. Not the Watcher. Not exactly. Something adjacent to it. Something waiting. The house at the center of Hawthorne Lane stood dark. Number 14. The original node. The place where the Peterson boy had vanished. Where the first figurines had appeared. Where Evelyn had first felt the cognitive command press into her skull like cold fingers. Observe. Integrate. The front door stood slightly ajar. She did not remember leaving it that way. Evelyn stepped inside. The air was warmer than outside, yet heavy. Not stagnant, occupied. The living room had changed. The furniture remained, the wallpaper still peeling in faint floral patterns, but the space felt deeper, expanded beyond its walls. Shadows gathered in the corners, not hiding but waiting. On the coffee table sat a leather-bound journal. It had not been there before. Her pulse slowed, not from calm but from recognition. This was the next phase. Not descent. Not alignment. Legacy. She approached the journal cautiously. The cover was worn, edges softened by years of handling. No title adorned it, just a faint spiral etched into the leather, subtle, almost invisible unless the light struck it at the right angle. Evelyn opened it. The first page was dated 32 years earlier. The handwriting was steady but increasingly erratic as the pages progressed. It belonged to someone named Thomas Vale, a name Evelyn vaguely recognized from town records. A reclusive tenant. Lived alone. Disappeared suddenly. No body found. She began to read. It watches. At first I thought it was grief or loneliness. But the house responds. When I move objects, they align themselves later. When I wake at night, the fog presses against the windows like a face. I think I am being trained. Evelyn turned the page. There are patterns beneath the floorboards. Small figures. I did not place them there. But when I move them, the fog shifts. When I align them, the town quiets. I believe I am not the first. Her breath caught. Not the first. The journal detailed experiences identical to her own. The clearing, though described differently. The river, though referred to as the mirrored current. The railway crossing, called the place where lines split reality. Even the quarry was there, the wound in the earth. Thomas Vale had descended. He had aligned. He had integrated. And he had understood something she was only beginning to grasp. The later entries became fragmented. It is not feeding on us. It is distributing itself. Each tenant becomes a stabilizer. We are not sacrifices. We are anchors. Evelyn felt the air thicken. The shadows in the corners shifted slightly, not threatening but attentive. She turned to the final pages. The handwriting trembled. The watcher is not singular. It is a function, an organizing principle. The seated is a memory of prior tenants. The miniature is not symbolic. It is literal. When the system grows, it requires decentralization. It requires continuity. The final line was written darker, as if pressed hard into the page. When I vanish, I will not be gone. The journal ended there. No explanation. No description of how. No farewell. Just absence. Evelyn closed the book slowly. The house creaked softly around her, not with decay but adjustment. She understood now why the house had been the starting point. Why tenants disappeared without signs of struggle. Why the town whispered but never investigated too deeply. Crow Hollow required continuity. When one anchor dissolved fully into the network, another had to take shape. A soft vibration passed through the floor. Instinctively, Evelyn knelt and pressed her palm against the wood. Beneath it, faint, but unmistakable, were figurines. Hundreds. Arranged in patterns mirroring every node she had encountered. The clearing. The river. The bridge. The silent crossing. The quarry. The chapel. All mapped beneath the house. This was not just a node. This was the central processor. And Thomas Vale had lived above it. Stabilized it. Learned from it. Eventually integrated so fully that his physical form was no longer required. Not dead. Distributed. The cognitive voice did not command this time. It conversed. You understand succession. Evelyn did not speak aloud. Yes. The air shifted, warmer now. Each tenant extends the lattice. The floorboards beneath her hand vibrated slightly, and in her mind she saw it, a vast network extending far beyond Crow Hollow. Other towns. Other houses. Other anchors. Crow Hollow was not isolated. It was a prototype. Or perhaps a route. The Watcher was not a creature in the traditional sense. It was a regulatory intelligence, a system that required localized human consciousness to interpret, stabilize, and expand its structure. Thomas Vale had been one. Before him, someone else. Now, the walls of the living room seemed to stretch subtly, like lungs filling with breath. She walked into the hallway. At the end, the spare bedroom door stood closed. The room where the Peterson boy had once slept during a brief foster placement. Where he had vanished. Evelyn opened it. The air inside was still. On the floor, arranged perfectly in a spiral, were small figurines, one at the center slightly larger than the rest. A child's shape. Not detailed. Abstract. But intentional. He had not been taken violently. He had been absorbed early. Unstable integration. The system had learned from that. Improved. Refined. Now it required adults. Voluntary cognition. Conscious alignment. Evelyn stepped back into the hallway. The house felt different now, not predatory but expectant. She returned to the living room and opened the journal again. Between the final pages, something had been tucked carefully. A photograph. Thomas Vale stood in front of the house decades earlier. He looked ordinary, tired, but behind him, in the second-story window, barely visible, was a faint distortion in the glass. A seated silhouette, watching, not threatening, observing. The seated was not just in the chapel. It manifested wherever stabilization was required. It was the accumulated memory of prior anchors. A realization settled over her. She would not vanish in the way the town feared. She would transition. Her physical form would remain for years, decades, perhaps, while her cognitive alignment deepened. She would maintain the lattice, strengthen it, expand it carefully. Crow Hollow would remain stable under her tenancy, until it grew too large again, until another mind was required. The front door creaked slightly. A neighbor passed outside, unaware of the recalibration occurring within number 14. Evelyn returned to the coffee table and placed the journal down gently. "I accept," she whispered. Not to surrender, but to assume responsibility. The fog outside pulsed once, subtly. The shadows in the corners elongated slightly, then settled. The house exhaled. That night, Evelyn did not descend into fog or quarry or chapel. She remained in the living room, listening. Beneath her feet, the figurines shifted minutely, aligning in response to distant nodes. She could feel the railway stabilize, the river quiet, the chapel dim. Her awareness stretched along invisible lines connecting them all. She was not consumed. She was installed. Weeks passed. The town adjusted to her presence unconsciously. The fog still rolled in at night, but it no longer suffocated. Disappearances ceased. The railway crossing remained silent but harmless. The quarry no longer trembled. Crow Hollow was balanced. Under her, occasionally, she would sense the echo of Thomas Vale, not a voice, not a ghost, but a residual pattern layered within the seated's memory. Others, too, faint impressions of prior tenants who had completed their distribution. She was not alone in the lattice. She was part of a lineage. One evening, as she sat in the living room with the journal in her lap, she felt a subtle ripple, distant, beyond the forest. A new development. A new street being constructed miles away. Foundations poured. A house framed. Empty. Waiting. The lattice extended toward it like curious roots. She understood then what the final phase would eventually require. Expansion. Not chaotic. Not violent. Deliberate. Another anchor. Another tenant. Another inheritance. Evelyn closed her eyes. She did not fear it anymore. The Watcher was not a monster lurking in fog. It was an architecture of awareness. A network that required human cognition as scaffolding. Thomas Vale had called it decentralization. He had been right. She would guide the next one more gently. Ensure they understood. Leave clearer records. Improve the transition. Legacy was not disappearance. It was continuity. Outside, the fog rolled softly through Crow Hollow, no longer predatory but purposeful. The house at number 14 stood quiet, lights glowing warmly in its windows. And within it, beneath floorboards etched with spirals and arcs, the lattice hummed steadily. Evelyn Hart, tenant and anchor, sat calmly in the dim light, observing, integrating, stabilizing, and somewhere, far beyond the forest, the foundation of a new house settled into the earth. Waiting. Winter came quietly to Crow Hollow. Snow fell in thin, deliberate sheets, not chaotic flurries, but steady, precise layers that softened rooftops and muted the town's edges. The fog did not disappear with the cold. It changed. It thinned during the day and crystallized at night, shimmering faintly beneath streetlights like breath caught in suspension. From the living room of number 14, Evelyn Hart felt every shift. Not with her skin, with the lattice. Beneath the floorboards, the figurines rested in perfect alignment. The clearing remained stable. The river no longer churned with restless eyes. The railway crossing lay quiet, rails no longer splitting into recursive mirrors. The quarry slept. The chapel stood still, the seated no longer glowing with corrective urgency. Crow Hollow was balanced. Because she was. At first, integration had felt like invasion. Now it felt like architecture. Evelyn sat cross-legged on the living room floor, palms resting lightly against the wood. She could sense the faint hum of the network, not a sound, not a vibration exactly, but a structured awareness extending outward in clean geometric lines. Spirals linked to arcs. Arcs nested within circles. Nodes mirrored nodes. The Watcher was still present. But it no longer loomed. It had distributed. Through her. Through the seated. Through the accumulated impressions of prior tenants layered like sediment in deep stone. Thomas Vale's echo flickered faintly in her perception. Not a personality, not a voice, but a configuration. A stabilizing pattern that had once held this position. Others lay deeper still, indistinct, ancient. She was part of the architecture now. And the architecture was growing. The first sign came as a tremor along the lattice's edge. Not within Crow Hollow. Beyond it, miles away, where new foundations had been poured before winter set in, a house frame stood wrapped in protective sheeting. Suburban. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Empty. The lattice brushed against it tentatively, like fingers testing fresh plaster. Evelyn inhaled slowly. It was time. She rose and walked to the hallway mirror. Her reflection had changed subtly over the past months. Not in age or distortion, but in stillness. She held herself differently. Watched differently. Behind her reflection, if she softened her gaze, she could glimpse faint geometric overlays, spirals ghosting across walls, arcs bending gently at the edges of perception. The house had become transparent to her awareness. Soon, another would. But expansion required intention. Care. Legacy was no longer accidental. It would be guided. That night, she retrieved Thomas Vale's journal from the coffee table and carried it to the kitchen. She set a kettle to boil and opened to the first page again. It watches. He had begun in confusion. In isolation. In fear. She would not allow that for the next anchor. Evelyn turned to a blank page at the back of the journal. She began to write. If you are reading this, the lattice has already touched you. Do not panic. You are not prey. You are being invited. Her handwriting was steady. Measured. She described the clearing. The river. The bridge. The railway crossing. The quarry. The chapel. She did not romanticize them. She explained their function. Nodes. Interfaces. Calibration points. She wrote of the seated, not as an idol, but as a memory archive. She wrote of Thomas Vale. Of succession. Of decentralization. She explained the difference between consumption and distribution. Between fear and architecture. By the time she finished, dawn light had begun to seep pale and blue through the windows. She closed the journal gently. It felt heavier now. Not with burden. With preparation. The expansion did not happen in a dramatic surge. It unfolded like frost spreading across glass. The new house miles away was completed in early spring. A young couple purchased it, drawn by price, by quiet surroundings, by the subtle comfort of something they could not name. Evelyn did not interfere. She observed. The lattice extended a single filament toward the house's foundation. It brushed the concrete gently, testing structural sympathy. The ground responded. Not immediately, but perceptibly. A faint spiral formed in the soil beneath the basement. Small. Unnoticed. Crow Hollow remained stable throughout. No disappearances. No tremors. No violent fog surges. Evelyn maintained the central processor beneath number 14 with quiet diligence. Occasionally, she would adjust a figurine subtly, recalibrating a distant node before instability could manifest physically. It felt less like survival now, more like stewardship. The Watcher's presence had become diffuse, a regulatory current flowing through the network rather than a towering form in fog. She wondered if it had ever truly been singular, or if human perception had simply required a shape. One evening, months after the new house was occupied, she felt it. Recognition. A mind brushing against the lattice for the first time. Confusion. A pause in the rhythm of breath. The young homeowner, Daniel, standing in his unfinished basement, staring at a small object half embedded in concrete near the support beam. A figurine. Spiral-etched. He bent to pick it up. The lattice brightened faintly. Not aggressively. Curiously. Evelyn closed her eyes and steadied her breathing. Do not overwhelm. Do not command. Invite. She let a single thread of awareness extend. Not words, not pressure, just presence. Daniel turned the figurine in his hand. The air in the basement felt denser to him suddenly. Not threatening. Focused. He did not yet understand. He would. Gradually. The way she had. But with guidance this time. That night, Evelyn placed Thomas Vale's journal, now expanded with her own writing, into a wooden box. She walked to the spare bedroom, the one where the Peterson boys' spiral still rested faintly beneath the floorboards. She knelt and pressed her palm against the wood. The lattice beneath responded instantly. Careful. Measured. She selected a configuration, not a full replication of Crow Hollow's central processor, but a seed pattern. Compact. Stable. Self-regulating. It pulsed once in acknowledgement, then extended outward along the filament toward the new house. Installation had begun. The process would take years. It had to. Rapid integration destabilized. The Peterson boy had taught the system that. Now, expansion would be deliberate. Consensual. Cognitive. Evelyn would remain anchor at Crow Hollow while the secondary node matured. When Daniel began to notice alignments, objects shifting slightly, fog forming in patterns, dreams of spirals, he would find the journal. Not by accident. Evelyn would ensure it. Spring deepened. The fog over Crow Hollow grew lighter, less invasive. Children played outside again. The railway crossing remained silent but safe. The quarry became nothing more than a geological scar in town memory. Balance held. Because the architecture was no longer improvising. It was designing. Late one evening, as she sat in the living room, Evelyn sensed something unexpected. Not instability. Not expansion. Recognition from deeper within the lattice. A configuration older than Thomas Vale. Older than the chapel. Older than the town itself. The root. Crow Hollow had not been the origin. It had been a branch. The lattice extended far beyond her comprehension, across states, perhaps continents. Other anchors. Other stewards. Other journals written in different hands. A vast, decentralized architecture of watching. Not oppressive. Structural. She was not at the center. She was a node among many. And that realization did not diminish her. It freed her. Snow returned briefly one late night in early spring, a final, delicate frost. Evelyn stepped onto the porch of number 14 and watched it settle across Hawthorne Lane. The fog shimmered faintly under the street lights. Peaceful. Structured. Alive. Behind her, beneath her, the lattice hummed in steady equilibrium. Miles away, Daniel lay awake in his new home, staring at the ceiling, a spiral-etched figurine resting on his nightstand. He was not afraid, only curious. That was enough. Evelyn smiled faintly. Legacy was no longer a mystery. It was meant to ship. Architecture was no longer reactive. It was intentional. The Watcher had evolved, from looming presence to distributed intelligence, from singular figure to network design. And she, tenant of number 14, was both steward and student within it. The fog drifted gently through Crow Hollow, observing, integrating, expanding, not as a predator, but as architecture,